Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're starting part 1 of an awesome What If Deku Joined UA's support core story. If you want to see part 2, drop a comment below and tell me what you think. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Now let's jump into the story. Chapter 1. New dream. Whether or not they know the actual word, 4-year-old children have a concept of destiny. It's usually ill-informed, but it's there. 4-year-old Midoriya Izuku knew that he was destined to be a hero. Unfortunately, poor little Izuku's destiny went off the rails and stayed off them for rather longer than he or his mother would have preferred. First, he was diagnosed as quirkless in kindergarten. Then he had to watch all of his friends develop cool and interesting quirks. Then he had to stop calling them friends because they stopped treating him like one. His father left. It would unfortunately take him entirely too long to understand that that one wasn't a loss worth grieving. The bullying continued until his first year of middle school, when his mother transferred him to a technology-focused magnet school. That was the first good thing that Izuku could remember happening to him. It had the dual effect of separating him from his tormentors and giving him a fresh start in an environment that aligned with his new goal. Izuku was going to make things that helped the greatest heroes. If he couldn't save people with a powerful quirk of his own, then he would engineer ways to save the people who saved people. From the utilitarian perspective, he even had a chance of helping more people than the average hero did if his support equipment was good enough. And if he was honest with himself about his general anxiety, life in a lab or a workshop would probably agree with him more than a life of danger anyway. Throughout middle school, Izuku kept his head down, shied away from others, and tried to prepare himself for his new dream, the UA support course. He joined his new school's competitive robotics team and made a name for himself as the best programmer in the league, though the team-oriented nature of the competitions and his fear of the spotlight kept his name out of the public eye. When the time came, Izuku took the UA entrance exam and, as was tradition for the support course, submitted source code and a video demonstrating his best personal project. It was a modified drone that could follow a person and alert them if they were being tailed or approached. It could also discreetly describe the menacing presence to its owner using text-to-speech if it was paired to an app on the owner's phone. Izuku hoped to develop the concept further if he got accepted. All of the days he spent waiting for an answer blurred together as he hoped and prayed that he wouldn't have to find a new calling again. He was older and wiser now, but he didn't think it would hurt any less, and there were precious few other paths that would put him anywhere near the heroes he so admired. He had applied to the business course as well, but he considered it to be a last resort. Weeks later, the Midoriya household received a letter bearing UA's logo in the mail. Izuku could not bring himself to open it and begged his mother to do it for him. Both of them sat at the dining table with preemptive tears in their eyes as 𝐒𝐭 took a deep breath and began to read aloud. On behalf of the UA support department, I am pleased to report that we accept your application, she shrieked. For a time she got no further as both mother and son screamed incoherently with euphoria and relief. They would have been able to resume reading sooner if Izuku had not leapt across the table to grab at the letter and landed on it hard enough to snap one of the table's legs, injuring his hand as he rode the doomed piece of furniture to the floor. Even as he cradled his smashed hand, Izuku's tears were joyful. The universe had extracted its payment for his new fortune, and he could say with total certainty that he'd come out ahead. His hand was almost completely recovered by the time classes started. But even if it hadn't been, building new limbs was probably just a regular day at UA. Izuku was positively vibrating with excitement. He was in his brand new homeroom on his first day of high school at the institution with the best support program in the whole country. But all of that was taking a backseat to the fact that his teacher was 𝐺𝐺. An actual pro hero was his homeroom teacher. The excavation hero 𝐺𝐺 rarely did much actual hero work. His quirk was more of a niche item for underground rescues and the odd subterranean villain battle, but the fact that a real pro hero was going to see Izuku's designs right off the bat was both exhilarating and terrifying. He could only hope that he remembered to call the man Myheroacademia instead of 𝐺𝐺. Hello, everyone. I am myheroacademia, though one or two of you might know me as the pro hero 𝐺𝐺. I don't end up in the news much, but that's okay by me. I'd rather be here making stuff anyway. Pro tip: if you don't like being on TV, just refuse to wear a shirt. He tapped the side of his excavator-themed helmet a couple of times. I've been dodging interviews that way for years. Reactions to this statement were varied. Izuku thought he heard a muffled snort or two and definitely saw some looks of confusion. Regardless of how people felt about it, it seemed to be an effective strategy. He was a self-admitted hero geek and he couldn't remember ever seeing an interview with Power Loader. Anyway, we've got a busy semester ahead of us and I know most of you are itching to get to work, but we're going to start with shop safety. There were scattered groans and a general slumping of shoulders throughout the room, but Power Loader did not seem surprised or deterred by them. And yes, there will be a quiz, he sternly continued. The only way you get to use equipment at UA is by getting 100% on any relevant safety exams. Izuku silently nodded along. He guessed that many of the other students had more experience than him and might have believed that they didn't need the safety lectures, but he needed all the help he could get. He noticed a girl with pink hair at an adjacent table pouting slightly at the news. The rest of the morning was spent learning how to use hand tools and power tools without maiming anyone. Myheroacademia would start by introducing a tool, demonstrating safe usage, and asking the class how a novice was likely to use it wrong. While many of the other students offered answers and the occasional harrowing personal experience, Izuku stayed quiet and attempted to soak up as much as he could. He wasn't worried about the quiz, he had always been a good test taker, but he knew he was behind his peers on the use of tools. All he had at home was a screwdriver kit and a hobby-grade 3D printer. He knew that he couldn't make anything that a hero would bring into the field with those alone. At lunchtime, Izuku failed to prevent himself from holding up the line in the cafeteria when he came face to face with the pro-hero lunch rush. He had a small set of questions that he'd settled on which he thought could be answered quickly, but he had underestimated the speed at which the lunch line moved. He'd probably embarrassed himself a bit, but he consoled himself with the knowledge that he had 3 years at UA to run into him again. Maybe he could continue their conversation in installments. He had just sat down among some of his classmates taking care to put himself at the empty end of the table when he noticed the girl with the pink hair entering the cafeteria looking frustrated. Even more curiously, he noticed Myheroacademia a few steps behind her, looking just as frustrated as she did. The hero paused near the doorway and gestured toward the room at large. The girl seemed to huff with indignation and then sag slightly as she looked for the end of the food line and joined it. Just before she grabbed a tray, she looked back at the entrance to find Myheroacademia still there, arms crossed, giving her what seemed to be a stern or pointed look. It was hard to tell with the helmet. Is she in trouble for something already? Izuku wondered. He watched as the perturbed girl grabbed a couple items of food possibly at random and turned to survey the lunchroom, likely trying to figure out where to sit. The other people from his class were still engrossed in conversation and did not seem to have noticed her. While he was normally hesitant to socialize with others, he felt a sense of responsibility to spare the girl from eating with strangers if she didn't want to. Izuku tentatively put his hand up to wave to the girl, just in case she wanted to eat with her class. The girl caught sight of Izuku's hand and swiftly made her way toward him. He noted with concern that she did not smile as she approached or sat down. She still seemed upset and he hoped that she wouldn't take her anger out on him, especially since his day seemed to be going so well. How long is lunch? The girl inquired without looking at the green-haired boy. Instead she was craning her neck to see the doorway which Myheroacademia seemed to have vacated. I think he said it was 40 minutes. The girl cast a forlorn look at her watch, which Izuku noticed was nearly 2 centimeters thick. It looked positively enormous on her average-sized wrist. When she put her arm down and poked listlessly at her food, he was able to examine the watch's face, which led to his own face lighting up in excitement. Is that a Nixie watch? Oh, the girl said, looking up at him. Yeah, I made it a couple years ago. Wow, Izuku breathed, it's really cool. I've never seen one in person before. Finally the girl seemed to have something to smile about. As she looked up to wave the compliment off, he noticed that her eyes were a brilliant yellow with some kind of crosshair pattern. PFF, that's nothing. This was one of my first babies. I've made much cuter things since then. She boasted, pulling a sticker-covered notebook out of her bag. Izuku caught a brief glimpse of the stickers and recognized some of them as symbols and slogans of the open source and right to repair movements. He was pretty sure he also saw a sticker with a swear word and a stylized depiction of a hand being mangled in machinery. And I'd be able to make even cuter babies if he would just let me use the DMN workshop already, she grumbled. Oh, is that why my 𝐂𝐸𝐺 was looking at you when you came in? All I was doing was trying to turn the metal printer on, she huffed. I wasn't going to try to use it yet. I just wanted to figure out which alloys it can print. I told him I obviously know safety because I'm still alive, and he said we do not apply the anthropic principle to shop safety and told me I couldn't play with tools until I passed the safety quiz. She complained, flipping through pages roughly. I wasn't playing, she mumbled petulantly. Izuku smiled. The metal printer was one of the few tools he was somewhat qualified to discuss. I think he has to treat everyone the same, even if he can tell that you're smart enough not to hurt anyone. The girl pursed her lips and seemed to consider this. Him. Maybe. I don't know much about metals, but I think that printer is popular and open enough that you can find slicer and material profiles for it pretty easily. Oh, you've seen it before. Her mood seemed to improve in an instant. I think so, or maybe one of its sister models from the same company. I'm really hoping it works with Slick 4R since I'm already used to it. Is that one open source? She inquired with a hint of suspicion. Yeah, Izuku reported with a smile. That's half the reason it's my favorite. The girl gave him a look of appraisal. I like you, she declared, then offered her hand. Hatsumi. Izuku blushed and took the proffered hand. Midoriya Izuku. So what kind of things have you made? The conversation that followed was so engrossing that their food went untouched. At first Izuku was afraid to eat when Hatsumi wasn't eating, and when the bell rang Izuku feared he would look foolish in front of her if he tried to eat quickly. Thankfully that fear was quickly put to rest when Hatsume's panic eating far outstripped his own. They rushed back to class together, still excitedly discussing their past and future creations. The safety lectures continued until mid-afternoon, at which point the first safety quiz was administered. Apparently no one failed. At the end of the day, Majima-sensei had even more good news to share. Tomorrow, you're going to spend your morning homeroom figuring out what you'd like to make this week. Even though you've passed the quiz, I'm not turning you loose completely, that was just a general overview. For your first project you can use any tools you've already practiced with and up to one tool that you haven't used before. If you want to make something that's too far out of your wheelhouse, then you might want to think about teaming up with somebody who knows things you don't. Izuku reflexively glanced at Hatsume and was startled to find her looking back at him. He found it hard to imagine there was much he knew that she didn't, but he was delighted to know that she saw him as someone competent. He flashed her a quick smile which she returned before she began flipping through her notebook, likely in search of a candidate for her first project of the semester. Starting tomorrow you'll also have your regular classes. I believe Tuesday and Thursday will be Japanese and math, while Wednesday will be English and chemistry. That'll be Mondays as well starting next week. Fridays will be support concepts days here, but this week I'm letting you have it as a work day. So, plan accordingly. That night Inko was full of questions about Izuku's first day at UA. Who was his teacher? Did he see any heroes? What did he learn? What was the campus like? Questions about his classmates were conspicuously absent, and Izuku correctly assumed that his mother didn't want to pressure him about making friends. She knew it was difficult and that experience had taught him to be very cautious about other people. She was surprised that he had a pro-hero for a teacher, even in the support course. She was equally surprised to hear that the man never wore a shirt, but she conceded that it took all sorts to make a world. When Izuku further explained that serial shirtlessness was Power Loader's strategy for dodging media appearances, she tittered appreciatively. Anyone who was either that humble or that sarcastic would probably be a decent role model for her boy. The following morning Izuku found that the class had sorted itself into 3 groups of people: those who had ideas and were pitching them, those who were offering their skills or simply hitching their proverbial wagons to likely stars, and those who were keeping to themselves. Hatsume seemed to be in the last group, staring fondly at her notebook while making the occasional scribble. Having seen her notes during lunch the previous day, he knew that she had plenty of options and was curious to know whether she had settled on something. He grabbed his own notebook and made his way to her desk. "Have you decided what you're going to make?" Izuku inquired. "I'm going to do the brass knuckles for Mount Lady if he'll let me," the pink-haired girl replied, tracing the drawing with her finger. "Wow, I bet that's bigger than anything the rest of the class will make. 𝐻𝐸𝐽 smirked and hummed an affirmation. The glint of determination in her eye suggested that she really wanted to make an impression in her first week. What about you? Izuku frowned, looking at his own notebook with disappointment. I'm not sure. I don't know if I can make anything really good by the end of the week. I've been dreaming of making something new without some dumb leak telling me what parts to use, but now I'm not sure where to start, especially with the deadline. He mused. I could just iterate on my surveillance drone again, but that seems like it'll be boring and basic compared to what other people might do. I could work with someone else to learn new things, but I might not be useful enough for anyone to want me on their team. 𝐻𝐸𝐽 perked up at his last statement. I wouldn't call a machine that can react and communicate basic, but you could work with me. I'll probably need some CAD and printing done for the knuckles, depending on how fast the printer is. And you could learn some welding, she added, nudging his shoulder and flashing him a wide grin. Izuku flushed and smiled. Really? That sounds good to me. He clenched his fists and met her gaze with a look of determination. I'll definitely do my best to help if my 𝐂𝐸𝐽-sensei approves it. Good. Do you think the CAD part will be really hard? Probably harder than anything I've done so far, but it should be doable. I think the challenge is actually storage, because the knuckles have to be sized for her giant form. There's no way to make them collapse or scale with her and still be useful, because... He trailed off and pensively made some stretching gestures in the air. No, the geometry just makes that impossible. So yeah, it has to be its final size, but then the question is, where are they when she's not using them? She can't drag them around in her base form. Even if we made them light enough, the sheer size would slow her down. The challenge is strategic placement. Where could she leave them that's easily accessible for her giant form without them being in the way? He frowned at the drawing and stroked his chin for some time. If they were useful as something other than brass knuckles for a giant, what else can you do with that basic shape? Can we call it art? He mused helplessly. I hate modern art though. He grumbled. The last thing he wanted was to present some weird misshapen thing to his community and call it art. What can you do with that shape? He repeated, staring intently at the drawing. 𝐻𝐸𝐽 looked between Izuku and her notebook sympathetically. She had failed to consider the logistics of storage and deployment, and she keenly wished she had an answer for him. It's a big metal thing that will have to go outside. It has 4 big holes. What in the world is like that? As she perused her mental inventory of big metal things outside, she hit upon an idea. It was fairly ludicrous and would probably generate some controversy, but it might actually work. Just to be sure, she did some quick math on the dimensions of Mount Lady's fingers, then grabbed a tape measure and, much to Izuku's confusion, began trying to measure the width of her own hips. Do you have a different idea? Izuku ventured, a light blush covering his cheeks as he looked on curiously. If you've got an idea for her suit, I think that they usually measure clothing with circumferences. He trailed off. He was pretty sure Mount Lady's suit was already a marvel of engineering, so he doubted 𝐻𝐸𝐽 was about to come up with a genuine improvement on its design. 𝐻𝐸𝐽 checked the tape measure and grinned, then began furiously scribbling on the drawing of the knuckle duster. After a moment, she turned excitedly to Izuku and showed him a much chunkier-looking design with rounded edges for the finger holes and some sort of small protrusion on either side. What if it's a park bench? Izuku looked in bewilderment at the odd new shape. 4 fingers, 4 seats. Yes. He hissed, his eyes widening at the sheer audacity and elegance of it. So you want to make a giant set of brass knuckles that doubles as a park bench? The 2 teens nodded with trepidation. That is either genius or a ghoulish normalization of the violence in our society. myheroacademia said matter-of-factly. I'm going to argue that it's genius, and if anyone questions it, we're going to tell them that we're a bunch of tone-deaf eccentrics. Got it? Izuku and his new partner nodded eagerly. Cool. 𝐻𝐸𝐽, you're the only one I'm clearing to weld. If I catch either of you near the welding equipment without the proper eye protection, I'm going to let the first-year hero course use you as practice dummies. They've got a guy who can drop a whole glacier on you and a girl who can dissolve you with acid, just to give you an idea. He shrugged as if suggesting that their theoretical punishment was truly out of his hands. I heard one of them is French. 𝐻𝐸𝐴𝐵 whispered quite seriously after myheroacademia walked away, as though the French one was by virtue of their nationality somehow as dangerous as Ice Boy or Acid Girl. The two teens quickly got to work. They were disappointed but unsurprised when myheroacademia told them that they couldn't invite 𝐿ady in to have her hands scanned or mold. He did say that if she liked the prototype they made that she'd probably want some revisions done, which was an exciting possibility. In lieu of a custom-fitted model they hunted down a 3D model of brass knuckles, scaled it correctly for 𝐿ady's giant form, added just enough extra material to make it function as a bench, and finally sliced it into pieces that would fit the department's biggest metal printer. They sent the first 2 sections to the printer and watched it go through its startup sequence. 𝐻𝐸𝐴𝐵's ambitious project quickly made an impression. A small crowd of their classmates had gathered around the huge machine after they noticed that it was active. 𝐻𝐸𝐴𝐵 was telling anyone who looked interested what they were making and insisting that it was going to be super cute. Izuku was triple-checking their slicer settings and watching the estimated finish time on the machine's display to ensure that it lined up with the software's estimate. If they printed day and night and jumped straight into welding the fresh sections onto the previous ones every morning, they would finish on time. An uneventful Japanese class led them into lunch, which they used as an opportunity to check on the metal printer. It hadn't gotten far. They knew that the pieces would finish in the small hours of the following morning. I don't think this girl is going to stick around long, 𝐻𝐸𝐴𝐵 said doubtfully, gesturing at one of the workstations in their deserted homeroom workshop. The girl's first project was a bodysuit of some sort. Because she's making a costume during the first week. Izuku guessed as they left the room and headed for the cafeteria. It's definitely a bold move, but maybe she already really knows what she's doing. No, because she's sewing an entire bodysuit out of ripstop nylon. It has no stretch, won't stop chemical attacks or bullets, doesn't insulate or wick moisture, and under a sustained fire attack it will melt right onto the skin. Izuku grimaced. Maybe she has some kind of plan for a base layer. All I saw her grab was nylon in multiple colors, a sewing machine, and a fin glue gun. Izuku rubbed the back of his neck nervously, still getting used to 𝐻𝐸𝐴𝐵's rough language. I did notice the glue gun. But I can't sew or weld or do any metalworking yet, so maybe they won't keep me around either. 𝐻𝐸𝐴𝐵 frowned. No, you're smart. They'll keep you. She looked uncertain for a moment. I'll make sure you can weld by the end of the week. She flashed him a small smile that was meant to be reassuring, and Izuku was struck again by her luminous yellow eyes. Lots of people with vision quirks had interesting eyes, but 𝐻𝐸𝐴𝐵's were probably the coolest and prettiest he'd ever seen. The freckled boy was taken aback by her promise. Thanks, he said softly, smiling as they entered the cafeteria. He was pretty sure the support course didn't spit people out at the same rate that the hero course did, but he was moved by the idea that 𝐻𝐸𝐴𝐵 would miss him if he was gone. With math class out of the way, they were back to homeroom where myheroacademia-sensei spent most of his time poring over the various teams' plans and mining them for teachable moments. When he identified such a moment, he would ask everyone but the team in question to find a stopping point in their work and gather around for a hands-on lesson. Some teams' designs were improved, salvaged, or scrapped in the face of new information. Throughout all of it, the metal printer soldiered on, slowly but inexorably building 𝐻𝐸𝐴𝐵's titanic weapon one layer at a time. It was easily one of the best days Izuku had ever had. Chapter 2. On the clock. Izuku was so early to homeroom the following morning that the door to the workshop was still locked, or at least that was the only explanation he could think of for 𝐻𝐸𝐴𝐵 still being outside the room. He couldn't say he was surprised that she had also arrived early, but he definitely felt an extra jolt of excitement when he saw her. Good morning. Izuku greeted her with a smile. Hey, 𝐻𝐸𝐴𝐵 replied. Do you think it worked? She was biting her lip and seemed to be willing herself to stare through the classroom door. For a brief moment Izuku wondered if vision outside the visible spectrum was part of her quirk, but he assumed she would be looking in the direction of the printer if it was. Regardless of what she could or couldn't see, she seemed to be a bundle of nervous energy. I bet it did. Izuku reassured her. Those printers aren't cheap, so I think the people who buy them probably wouldn't tolerate a high failure rate. I hope so. 𝐻𝐸𝐴𝐵 sighed. If it didn't work, we're probably screwed. We've got no wiggle room for extra print time. If it failed, we could abandon the brass knuckles and try something else. You've got plenty of ideas and I'd still be glad to help with them if you want me to. Izuku offered, averting his eyes in apprehension. Yeah, I guess there's still a lot we could make in 3 or 4 days. She picked up her bag to dig out her notebook, but she was interrupted by the arrival of Myheroacademia. I had a feeling at least one of you would beat me here, he muttered as he unlocked the door. Izuku wasn't sure whether their teacher was referring to the whole class or just himself and Hatsune. He didn't think any of the other groups were waiting on overnight processes like they were. As soon as Myheroacademia was through the door, Hatsune darted in behind him, slinging her bag onto a random desk and beelining for the metal printer. She caught the edge of the bench that supported the machine to stop herself and stared through the tinted glass at their freshly made parts. Oh hoo! It works! She exclaimed, fogging the glass in her excitement. Izuku's excitement was nearly equal to hers but more subdued. It wasn't the first time he had designed something one day and seen it manifested the next, but it was the first time he'd ever created something that looked positively bomb-proof. The idea that a model he had worked on was now sitting in front of him, rendered in real metal, was both humbling and invigorating. This could be a game-changer. Hatsume's smile was almost manic as Izuku checked the display to compare the actual print time to the estimate. Dad always says I should sleep more, but with this thing I might actually be willing to try. You should listen to your dad, Myheroacademia suggested as he moved to the back of the room to fetch a flatbed cart. Missing sleep is bad for you. Your health goes to CRP, you start making mistakes. Maybe you forget where all your shirts are. Maybe you decide to lean into it, but you keep it up so long you feel like you can't buy new ones. You don't want to go down that path, kid. Winters are cold. Izuku narrowed his eyes at Power Loader's back as the older man lowered one of the pieces onto the cart. He was joking about the shirts, right? He looked to Hatsune, who seemed to have tuned out the lecture before it got interesting. Yeah, I'll sleep. Hatsune quickly agreed as she got a shoulder under the remaining piece and took its weight. You got it? Myheroacademia asked in alarm, but she did seem to have it, mostly. She dropped it onto the cart much more roughly than their teacher had, but the cart had clearly been through worse things. Where is the welding equipment? Hatsune demanded. I'm going to have one of the third years take you over there to get you started. I'm not even sure which bays are free right now. Myheroacademia returned to his desk where he picked up his phone and punched what must have been a number he had on speed dial. Hey, I've got a team with a welding project about the size of a bench. They'll just be doing a couple pieces a day. Any idea which bays have some free space? There was a pause. Sounds good. Can you spare someone who knows what they are doing for a little while to set them up and check for good habits? Another pause. Thanks, Myheroacademia said, and hung up. Some of their classmates filtered in as they waited. Izuku passed the time by sending the next 2 pieces to the metal printer. Meanwhile, Hatsune dug through her bag and pulled out a set of heavy gloves, which she set aside. She kept digging and eventually pulled out a pair of goggles with extremely dark lenses. Izuku turned around in time to catch his new partner smiling as she traced the contours of the goggles with her finger. A couple of minutes later, a girl with a suspicious quantity of violently blonde hair and rather intense makeup entered the classroom. Myheroacademia-sensei, she exclaimed, where are the gorgeous little first eyes who will be practicing the art of welding today? Kenranzaki. You'll be working with Hatsune and Midoriya. They're making a knuckle duster for Mount Lady. Ambitious first eyes. Kenranzaki cooed as Izuku and Hatsune approached her. Izuku had noticed the girl's outlandish fake eyelashes the moment she walked in. They preceded her as she walked in, technically, and while he was making a conscious effort not to stare, Hatsune was making no effort to hide her awe and confusion at the upperclassman's extreme aesthetic. From the neck up, she looked like she was doing a photo shoot, though for what sort of magazine it was hard to say. It was made much stranger by the fact that she was wearing the standard jumpsuit that support students apparently wore to get dirty, though it was unzipped just far enough to show off a gaudy gold necklace. Let's get started, the older girl declared, pointing out the classroom door and marching through it, clearly expecting the 2 of them to follow. She immediately led them away from familiar territory, past the rest of the support classrooms and through a set of doors which spanned the full width and height of the hallway. On the other side of the doors the floor gave way from the usual tile to stained and gouged concrete. Garage doors lined either side of the hall and it didn't seem like the area was climate-controlled. The sounds of music and various tools leaked through some of the doors they passed before 𝐭𝐻𝐿 stopped at a door marked for and pressed the button to raise it. The space that was soon revealed was mostly empty. The only items in the room were all shoved against two walls. Along one wall was a sturdy workbench and a large sink. The adjacent wall hosted a large tool chest, a pegboard with every power tool Izuku could think of and several that he couldn't identify, power supplies, extension cords, welding guns, leather aprons, welding masks, gas tanks, a tap and hose for compressed air, rolling stools, and a boombox. The green-haired boy turned to his partner to remark on the incredible number of tools but stopped short when he saw the look on her face. Hatsume's luminous yellow eyes were shining with emotion as she surveyed the room, clearly moved by the raw potential she saw in it. "This is a good place," she whispered reverently. "It's nice, isn't it?" the upperclassman agreed. "You can really lose yourself here once you start getting dedicated shop days in second year. They'll even send someone to the cafeteria to bring you lunch so you don't track messes through the halls." "What do you have to do to skip the first year?" Hatsume asked sharply. 𝐭𝐻𝐿 laughed daintily. "Aho, you'll have to bide your time like the rest of us did." And then, she made a sweeping gesture to indicate the whole space and raised her voice theatrically, "You get to become one with your creations. To make art. To make dash babies." Hatsume nodded absently, gazing at the pegboard. Izuku suddenly choked on his own spit and began rapidly shaking his head between coughs. "She means inventions," he wheezed plaintively at the older girl. "Ah, well, I can't recommend making the regular kind here since all the support teachers can see you," she said, gesturing to a surveillance camera overhead, "and of course Nezu sees all." She tapped her forehead knowingly. Izuku was surprised that her finger didn't come back pure white with the amount of foundation she had on. "Come on, let's get you set up. Grab an apron, both of you." Hatsume immediately jumped into the pile of equipment, grabbing 2 aprons and quickly pressing one into Izuku's hands while he fought to clear his windpipe. She hurriedly donned her own apron and began pulling things toward the workbench. "Don't turn anything on quite yet, I need to check it over first." 𝐭𝐻𝐿 reminded them while grabbing 3 welding masks off the wall. Hatsume made a vague noise of assent, still visibly excited as she arranged the welding equipment around herself. When 𝐭𝐻𝐿 approached and attempted to hand her a mask, she refused it. "I have my own," she declared with pride, pulling the goggles that had sat atop her head over her eyes. "Oh," the older girl replied. "I don't recognize the model. Where did you get them?" "The lenses belong to my dad, but he got new ones so I remade the face gasket to fit me." "Ah, heirloom tools are just as appealing as the shiny new ones, aren't they? Or maybe they're even better, like kintsugi. Age doesn't make things ugly unless we let it." Izuku raised his eyebrows at the unexpectedly profound statement from the vain-looking girl. But she was quickly back to business. "May I please see?" Hatsume hesitantly removed her goggles and handed them over for inspection. 𝐭𝐻𝐿 flipped the hinged lenses up and down a couple of times and peered through one, apparently satisfied. "Very old school," she said fondly. "You know, the masks are automatic. You'll see in full color when the gun isn't active. It's much more convenient than these, and it doesn't leave room for error. I would feel better knowing that you were wearing the modern version." "I like mine," Hatsume said cautiously but firmly, unsure if the older girl was going to ban her from using her baby. "If you promise to check them every time you pull the trigger, you can wear them." 𝐭𝐻𝐿 conceded, then turned to Izuku who had been watching the exchange with interest. "And your friend can keep an eye out too?" Izuku nodded, hoping that Hatsume wouldn't feel betrayed by his commitment to keep her safe. Even if he was afraid of upsetting her, he hated the idea of her brilliant eyes getting damaged, to say nothing of whatever vision-related quirk she must have. Soon 𝐭𝐻𝐿 finished inspecting the welding equipment Hatsume had hooked up. She declared it to be in working order, abruptly disconnected the gun and walked out of the work bay with it. Hatsume gaped like a fish and gestured silently at the space where the gun had been, then scurried after the older girl. Izuku followed closely after her, hoping she wasn't about to do something rash. Whether she did so knowingly or not, 𝐭𝐻𝐿 led them past the numbered doors to a door that was labeled metal, scrap. She paused to tuck the welding gun under one arm and opened the door, revealing pretty much what Izuku had expected. 𝐭𝐻𝐿 quickly grabbed 2 pieces of aluminum and turned to leave, at which point she registered the first year's presence and smiled. "Take these," she said as she pushed the 2 bits of metal into Hatsume's hands. For her part, Hatsume looked less confused but still perturbed as the older girl began leading them back to bay. She checked her oversized watch as they walked, worrying her lip at the number she saw there. When they were back at the workbench, 𝐭𝐻𝐿 laid the 2 pieces of metal next to each other and asked the increasingly antsy Hatsume to weld the 2 together. The begoggled first year grinned as their senpai finally relinquished the welding gun and instructed Izuku to put his mask on while she donned one of her own. Izuku was not at all clear on how her prodigious eyelashes fit inside the mask, but he trusted that she had a plan. Hatsume flipped the lenses on her goggles down and pulled the trigger, beginning the delicate process of joining the 2 pieces of irrelevant junk. After Izuku got used to the odd color palette the world had taken on when the trigger was depressed, his eyes bounced between the nexus of flame and metal and Hatsume. She smiled softly as she worked, looking very much at home. After Hatsume had welded a couple of centimeters, 𝐭𝐻𝐿 spoke. "That looks strong." The torch clicked off and Hatsume flipped her lenses out of place so that she could regard the older girl with a proud grin. "Do you want to know how to make it look nicer?" 𝐭𝐻𝐿 inquired. "Practice," the pink-haired girl guessed. "Slowing down is the first step, actually." Hatsume heaved a sigh and gazed despondently at an empty spot on the workbench. "I'm not saying you have to." 𝐭𝐻𝐿 laughed. "But the option is there if you'd like to try someday. If you keep welding the way you just did, then your knuckle duster will hold up fine." Hatsume turned to Izuku and fixed him with a determined grin. "I will teach you the art of ugly welding," she declared magnanimously, flipping her lenses back into place. The 3rd year laughed again and left the pair to their work. They made decent progress before they had to leave for English. Izuku had observed for a while and finally attempted to weld himself a few minutes before the bell rang. He looked forward to trying again that afternoon. Despite present MIC's ability to command the class's attention because he was present frigging MC and that was his thing, and he was Izuku's English teacher, Izuku found himself frequently glancing at Hatsume. Initially he did so out of simple curiosity. She was nice to him, confident, and very interesting, but as the class wore on he grew concerned at the amount of confusion on his partner's face. He got the impression that her English skills were behind. When the class practiced English words aloud, he could see her lips moving, tasting the alien syllables and clearly wishing she could spit them out. He didn't think he could pick her voice out from the others, and it made him wonder whether she was even saying anything. He knew he wasn't bad at English himself, though he'd probably be nowhere near the top of the class. After watching Hatsume's face shift from confusion to hopelessness during the lesson, he silently resolved to help her with the class as much as he could. Why is English like that? How the F did Britain ever become a superpower with a language that stupid? Hatsume groaned, clutching her head in her hands as she hunched over her lunch tray. Theft. Izuku shrugged sympathetically. I mean, yeah. Hatsume blew out a sigh. Definitely that, but just, what the F? Did you understand it? Izuku winced. I usually do okay with English. It's definitely not easy, but I'd be happy to help if you want. I think I'm going to need it. Hatsume frowned at her bowl of rice, picking at it listlessly. Hey, at least we've got it easier than the hero course students. Right now they are juggling classes and trying to prepare for the sports festival. Hatsume's chopsticks froze on the way to her mouth and her eyes instantly fixed on Izuku, her irises seeming to breathe. He couldn't think of a better word and didn't have time to try because she was asking him with surprising urgency exactly when the sports festival would occur. Next week, I think. I think it's always the 2nd week of the school year. Izuku was not musically trained, but he was willing to bet that his partner's voice dropped 2 whole octaves as she uttered the word "what" with deadly intensity. Chapter 3. Plunge. Izuku was concerned. For the first time since he'd met her, Hatsume had gone completely still. It seemed to be a direct result of him looking up the programming schedule for the network he knew would be carrying the broadcast of the sports festival and confirming that it started on Wednesday, 1 week from today. Unsure of what to do but assuming that more information was better than less, Izuku gently added that the first-year students always went first. At this, his catatonic cohort let out a strange, nervous little laugh which suggested fear much more than mirth. "I fed up," Hatsume said thickly. She began taking deep breaths. "I fed up," she repeated, now nodding with something more like acceptance, her eyes beginning to shine with unshed tears. Panic rose in Izuku. His mind should have been racing to figure out why Hatsume would be upset about the festival, but all he could do was look on in silent horror, heart clenching as her eyes welled over. The sight of tears hitting the distraught girl's lunch tray finally broke the spell that had frozen him. "What's wrong?" he asked quietly. "I fed up," she repeated with a tiny shrug and a damp, wan smile. She closed her eyes and shook her head while roughly scrubbing the tears off her cheeks. She then took a deep breath and shakily released it. "I had plans for the festival. Big plans, but I didn't know." She shook her head, staring straight through her food without seeing it. "I didn't know," she repeated quietly, "it would happen so soon. There's not enough time." Izuku knew that the festival was open to all UA students, not just the hero courses. The support course students were allowed to participate with equipment as long as they had made it themselves. "Were you planning to make something and compete with it?" "I was planning to make like 6 things and compete with them," she said with a watery laugh, her voice cracking. "Why do they have the festival at the beginning of the year? Why not the end, or even the middle? What the hell?" She sighed again and lapsed into silence. "I've always kind of wondered that." Izuku laughed and nervously scratched the back of his neck. He was beginning to suspect that Hatsume was not much of a planner, but she clearly had other qualities that would make her successful. "I wanted to put the support department in the top 16 for once," she quietly explained. "I wanted to show them that you can be a hero, no matter what your quirk is. Even if you didn't have one." She added as an afterthought. "I wanted them to know that we could keep them safe." She'd certainly had Izuku's attention before, but he was positively electrified by the things she was saying now. Unaware of the effect she'd had on him, she continued. "I wanted it to be a big debut. Trounce at least one hero student, or give them a decent fight. Tell them all that Hatsume would build whatever they needed to keep them safe, so they could keep everyone else safe." "What do you want to build?" Izuku asked, and something in his voice must have struck a chord in Hatsume because she was regarding him with surprise and maybe even hope. She gave him a searching look and pulled out her notebook, flipping through the pages until she reached one with sketches and a diagram of some kind of 𝐻𝐻𝑠. The heading on the page was "The Artful Dodger." There was some text with the drawings. It seemed to be a list of features, design considerations, and questions. Tracks environment foes in 360 degrees evades automatically using quick-fire telescoping pistons may break user's spine, neck, need to look up shock load limits for standard human spine could be programmed to clothesline or trip villains when opportunity arises will probably trip them most of the time anyway probably need to set force limit on direct hits to foes, maybe offer override hydraulic, pneumatic, combustion, carbon fiber for weight reduction. How well does carbon fiber work as a pressure vessel? After apparently tracking his progress through the page and deciding that he had the gist of it, she elaborated. "Forget everything but the dodging on that one, everything else would take too long and there aren't any villains in the festival." Hatsume flipped to a different page. "And then there's the net pistol," she explained, showing him the compact net gun he remembered discussing with her the day they met. He nodded, gesturing for her to continue. She started flipping through pages again. "I thought about doing the auto balancer but I think you had a good point about limited usability indoors, so I can live without it. And there's no way I could do the powered leg assists yet. Biology of support doesn't get covered in the first year but I was hoping to try to figure it out anyway if I had time. If I tried it now I'd probably destroy my knees. So the dodging 𝐻𝐻𝑠 and the net gun, what else?" "Grappling hook," Hatsume said, stopping on the relevant page. "Does that need a targeting system?" Izuku asked. "Wasn't planning on it," she replied. Izuku nodded and gestured for her to continue. "And," she said with trepidation, "the hover souls." She seemed to be able to find that page quite easily. "I remember." Izuku frowned. I don't remember if you ever told me what the power source is. 𝐻𝐸𝐽 sighed. I still don't know. If it's an electric turbine instead of stored compressed air, then the power draw would be insane. A flywheel battery that close to the body is too dangerous, plus there's the gyroscopic effect which would make movement harder, and pretty much nothing else has the energy or power density to do the job. Best I've come up with so far is supercapacitors, but the flying time would be CRP. It seems like the only alternative is essentially strapping actual combustion turbines to someone's feet. Izuku assumed that any idea that relied on jet fuel probably wasn't viable. Flying was pretty much the holy grail of locomotion. It was incredibly versatile, but there were alternatives. Izuku smiled. Well, if you have the dodging 𝐒𝐻𝐸𝐽, then maybe you could hop instead of flying. He'd always liked rabbits, and the rabbit hero Miruko had been rising to prominence in recent years. There was one instance of an exceptionally well-coordinated news crew capturing video of her traveling to a fight, and the look of joy and feral determination on her face as she bounded to the scene of the crime was something that stuck with Izuku to this day. There was a good reason he took down one of his All Might posters to put hers up. He considered the space on his wall well earned. That's more programming. 𝐻𝐸𝐽 tilted her head as she considered it. I'll do my best. Izuku said. I'll program the dodging 𝐒𝐻𝐸𝐽 and finish the knuckle bench while you're building everything else. Izuku had learned to read people fairly well when he was younger. Predicting other people's states of mind helped him minimize his daily torment, but he was not sure what to make of the look his pink-haired partner was giving him right now. Do you really think we can do it? She asked in a small voice. She was not smiling, but there was a barely detectable thread of hope in her voice. I think we have to try. He smiled and held his fist out to 𝐻𝐸𝐽. Plus ultra. Plus ultra, she echoed with a wobbly grin, sniffling as she bumped her fist against his. She dabbed at her eyes again. Give me your line ID, I think we're going to be working late tonight. Every night, actually. Izuku was so focused on making 𝐻𝐸𝐽's dream a reality that he never really registered the fact that a girl had asked him for his contact info. Chemistry passed with little fanfare, though 𝐻𝐸𝐽 did close her eyes and clench her jaw when the teacher, who was not a pro hero for once, or at least not one that Izuku knew, announced that today's class would simply be a safety briefing. She quickly changed her perspective, seemingly deciding that this class was the scheduling equivalent of free real estate. She began making notes about her projects for the sports festival instead of chemistry. Izuku tried to ensure that his lab safety notes would be good enough for both of them, though he privately wondered when she would actually have time to read them. As soon as they got back to homeroom, 𝐻𝐸𝐽 accosted myheroacademia and asked him how late they were allowed to work at the school. We close up at 7 unless there's something special going on. Midoriya and I are doing very special things, and we may need to do them all night, she insisted passionately. This earned Izuku some amused looks and snickers from his classmates. Thankfully his partner elaborated. We have to get ready for the sports festival because Principal Nezu is insane and he scheduled it the second week of school. That is an accurate assessment of the sports festival situation, yes. Myheroacademia nodded. You want to build something for the festival in less than a week, on top of your assigned work. 3 things. 4. She looked questioningly at Izuku, who was too surprised to do anything more than shrug. At least 3 things. 2 of them are small though. And I promise we'll still get Mount Lady's brass knuckles done. I suppose if you're not working on anything potentially dangerous, you can work the evenings, but you'll need to check in with whoever is supposed to be closing. There's a schedule posted outside the work bay wing dash. Some of it is definitely dangerous. 𝐻𝐸𝐽 cut him off. Can we stay overnight? One could never really see Myheroacademia's expression under his helmet, but the sudden tilt of his head strongly suggested disbelief. Overnight? Are you serious? No. And what exactly are you trying to build that's dangerous? Why not? 𝐻𝐸𝐽 demanded. We'll lose too much time if we're trying to squeeze it all in between classes. Don't you want to see the support department make it into the final round this year? The hero's posture sagged slightly. 𝐻𝐸𝐽, that almost never happens, he delicately explained. He sighed and continued. The event is geared toward the hero classes. It gets people excited about the new CRP of heroes and sets them up for their internships. The support department gets to shine by equipping the second and third year hero students. Most of the support department first years just watch the matches for inspiration. But the rules don't prevent a support core student from winning. A lot of the first year hero kids are probably just as green as we are. Don't you want to watch us beat some of them? Whatever happened to plus ultra? She entreated him. Don't you plus ultra me? 𝐒𝐻𝐫 said, lifting a finger in warning. Anyone who's been here as long as me is immune to that. Okay, we'll leave when they tell us to. 𝐻𝐻𝐫 conceded. We'll be in Bay 4 if you need us. Please don't hype us up to other departments until we're sure our babies are working. 𝐒𝐻𝐫 chuckled. Figure out who's going to be prying you out of there at 7 and let them know what you're doing. Do it now before you forget. The pink-haired girl smiled and began collecting things to bring to Bay. He turned to Izuku. Midoriya, are you a hostage? He asked in a stage whisper. Blink twice for yes and once for no. The green-haired boy laughed nervously. That's not a blink, kid. Can't help you if you don't ask for it. 𝐒𝐻𝐫 gave an exaggerated shrug. I want to help her, 𝐒𝐻𝐫-sensei. Izuku affirmed. Don't let her push herself too hard, and don't let her push you too hard either. And don't be afraid to ask the upper years for help. Izuku nodded, grabbed his laptop and his school-issued heavy gloves, and headed off to the work area he and 𝐻𝐻𝐫 had claimed. He fired off a quick message to his mother as he walked. Going to be home late. Working after school. Okay, be sure you don't miss the train. Love you. He opened the big overhead door to their oasis and found his pink-haired partner waiting for him. He flashed her a smile. I am here, he announced, posing heroically with his hands on his hips next to the workbench. To receive my diploma for ugly welding, he continued with faux pride. Him, are you? 𝐻𝐻𝐫 mused aloud as Izuku sat down and donned his mask. Let's find out. The lenses of her goggles clicked into place and he pulled the trigger. After 𝐻𝐻𝐫 gave his practice welding her nod of approval, Izuku moved on to the actual pieces they were meant to be welding and finished them in about half an hour. He removed his mask to find that his partner had vanished. Confused and concerned, he decided it was worth checking the classroom. Thankfully she was there, bent over her notebook and a laptop, searching for parts for the Artful Dodger. Hey, she greeted him. Can't see anything but the flame when I have the goggles on, so I came back here to get some stuff done. She gestured to the browser window that was open on the laptop. Got enough tabs open, there? Izuku teased. 𝐻𝐻𝐫 gave the tabs in question a bleak look. No, actually. I feel that. Izuku nodded. She gestured to the active tab which showed a hydraulic piston. Have you ever written firmware for something like that? It doesn't come with a controller. Izuku frowned. Are you supposed to make your own from scratch, or is it compatible with an existing controller? I don't know. She replied with a shrug. I've never had the budget to order something like this before. Actually, what is our budget for this stuff? I emailed 𝐒𝐫𝐫-sensei and he said it was complicated, and that I am a severe budget anomaly, and I'm mortgaging my future. So I'm not sure, but I think I may have to get creative later in the year. He said something about grant money, too. Maybe someone will give me one of those. There's always eBay. Izuku mused. I think half of what I want is against their terms of service, but maybe, she agreed. Well, Izuku said, returning to the task at hand, it would be great if we could find something that already had a controller, especially given the time constraint. But I guess either way we should talk through the logic this thing will be working on for the festival. 𝐻𝐻𝐫 hummed. We need it to dodge, both automatically and on command. And we need to be able to vary the amount of force it's using. Oh, she exclaimed, the final round is single combat in a ring, right? We have to program it not to accidentally send me out of the ring. Izuku's eyes widened. He frowned, staring unseeingly at an empty space on the wall. Tracking and avoiding obstacles that are moving at high speed, and precision movement to a space that's recognized as safe, in real time. He muttered. That already exists somewhere. Cars, they said simultaneously. The grins that followed were also simultaneous. Self-driving systems were ubiquitous in cars and generally quite good. They were also almost universally proprietary. There were perhaps 1 or 2 car brands sold in Japan that based their autopilot systems on the leading self-driving open-source project, but those companies had put a lot of work into the project internally to make it perform acceptably. The project in its publicly available form was known to be unreliable at best. I'm going to need some data to train the model. Izuku frowned. Self-driving systems certainly knew what a person looked like, but they were trained to avoid pedestrians. Pedestrians might look substantially different from an attacking villain from a piece of software's perspective. He needed video of people attacking from a first-person perspective, and he needed a lot of it. He smiled and looked up at Hatsune to find that she was already looking at him expectantly. Body cams, she inquired. Body cams, he confirmed. I wonder if UA has an archive for training purposes. I guess you can email Sensei about it. Yeah, I need to get permission to order a computer to run the thing too. Izuku composed an email to myheroacademia requesting a combat-grade compact industrial computer with beefy graphics and a GPIO header and asking where he might find a large trove of hero or hero-hopeful body camera footage. He frowned. There was so little time. He'd have to remember to make requests like this during the day in the future since myheroacademia was surely done working for the day, and he responded. What did he say? Hatsune demanded. He said he's ordering the computer and he told me to ask Snipe Sensei about the training archive. They have footage from the upper year hero students, but we need to get permission to view it. I'll send Snipe an email now. The two of them went about their work for a few minutes, the room silent aside from their typing and occasional scribbling. After some time, Hatsune noticed that her partner had lapsed into silence, eyes unfocused, frowning at some indeterminate spot on her desk. What's wrong? She asked. The idea of being able to control the thing. Automatic dodging is one thing, but of course it wouldn't always be making the best strategic decision. You need a way to control it, but the methods that are the easiest to learn would telegraph your movements in a fight. Aren't there some heroes using brain-computer interfaces? She wondered aloud. Izuku grimaced. Yeah, but apparently they take a while to learn and they require a highly ordered mind. Oh. Yeah, instant death if I tried it. She laughed. The freckled boy laughed nervously along with her. I think we'll have to settle for some kind of muscle control, which would probably be necessary for jumping anyway. Izuku mused. Jumping will probably be just as useful as dodging in the first two events, whatever they are. He took a moment to stretch, attempting to work out the tension that had built in his neck and shoulders while he'd been working. I think I have enough to go on to start writing the bones of the program. The sooner you can get a hold of your actuators or whatever they end up being, the better. Then I can start figuring out how to make the thing move. Hatsune gave him a thumbs up. Definitely, she agreed. Izuku began packing, intending to get home soon enough to eat dinner at a reasonable hour. Just as he was about to leave the classroom, he suddenly remembered that he needed an industrial camera with a very high frame rate. No, for industrial cameras with a high frame rate, and pulled his laptop out in a panic so that he could hopefully get a message to myheroacademia-sensei before he retired for the evening. Finally he bade his partner good night, promising to work on the program until he had to sleep. He was so consumed by thoughts of the program that he barely registered his commute home. He was just contemplating the fact that the limits of fragile human bodies might work in his favor in terms of lowering his target processing frame rate when he found himself at the door to his home. He blinked in surprise and let himself in. I'm home, he announced, seeing his mother's shoes by the door. Welcome home, sweetie. 𝐒𝐭𝐻 replied from the new dining table. I wasn't sure how long you'd be out, so I already ate dinner. I just put it in the fridge, it might not even be cold yet. How was your day? It was. Izuku paused. He couldn't exactly say that Hatsune's extreme ambition coupled with the looming deadline was good, but he was still glad it had happened, somehow. Maybe because he was included in something greater than himself. It helped that the cause was both noble and close to his heart. Interesting. He finished. 𝐒𝐭𝐻 raised an eyebrow. Interesting how? Izuku moved to the kitchen and began fetching himself dinner. I'm working with Hatsune to make some really ambitious things for the sports festival. She wants to compete. He shook his head in disbelief and admiration as he faced the fact that he was working with someone who was brave enough to go up against the hero corps students in an event that was essentially made for them. 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲 smiled curiously. Isn't she the one you're working with on the brass knuckles for Mount Lady? Yeah, Izuku confirmed. We've got a ton of work to do, but she taught me how to weld today, so I'll be doing that and programming while she builds her support items for the festival. Are you programming the brass knuckles? 𝐒𝐭𝐴 asked in confusion. No, I'm doing the programming for one of the support items. There's no way one person could do it all in time. The festival is next week. Yes, I had it on the calendar. I wondered if you wanted to watch together or whether you'd be watching it all live in person. Will you be able to get a seat as a student? Izuku hadn't even thought about how actually being at UA would affect their family ritual of watching the highlight broadcasts every evening during the festival. I think I'm going to be right there, but I still want to watch with you after it's over. He offered his mom a reassuring smile as he brought his food to the table. I think I might be right next to the field when she's competing, whether I'm fixing my crappy programming or just bringing her water and towels. He joked. I'm sure your program won't be crappy, and I hope she appreciates your help with all this. 𝐿𝐴 said pointedly. Izuku detected a hint of concern. His mother was probably worried that someone might be taking advantage of him, which was not unreasonable given his track record with people. She does. She had already given up because she suddenly realized the festival was next week. I offered to help. It seemed like it meant a lot to her, and she said she wanted to prove that you don't dash. He paused and cleared his throat. Need a powerful quirk to be a hero. There was a beat of silence during which Izuku did not look up from his food. She sounds like a very nice girl. What's she like? The look on 𝐒𝐿𝐴's face was not one Izuku was familiar with. It seemed somewhere between happy and mischievous, but he saw no harm in answering the question. She's really smart. Ambitious too, but I guess that's obvious. She has some kind of vision quirk. Her eyes are yellow with crosshairs. I've never seen that color on anyone else. It's really pretty. For some reason his mother's smile twitched noticeably wider at that. She's not very good at English, but I told her I would help her. I'm not sure when we're going to have time to work on it though with everything we're doing. She loves machines. I think maybe she doesn't sleep enough. She said her father tells her to sleep more. She's funny sometimes, and I'm still not sure if she's doing it on purpose. He blushed as he recalled Mai's gaffe when she demanded permission to do very special things late at night together. She tried to guilt Majima-sensei into letting us stay past the time the support wing closes, and she did it in front of the whole class. I guess that makes her brave, and maybe a little crazy. It didn't work, but that didn't faze her much. She's definitely not afraid to ask for what she wants. 𝐒𝐴 was still grinning widely. Maybe she could join us for our watch parties next week and you can help her with her English. That's a good idea. Izuku agreed. If they didn't crash and burn at the festival or he didn't do anything else to make her resent him, he would definitely extend an invitation. It would be fun to watch the festival with another support student, and his mom's cooking was the best way he could think of to thank someone for making him part of something so incredible. As he ate dinner, he explained the concept of the Artful Dodger support to his mother, who found it very interesting, commenting that Hatsune might be even more ambitious than he'd suggested. After he finished, he excused himself and retired to his bedroom in order to begin crafting the program that would push his skill to its very limits and beyond. Izuku sat down at his computer, turned on some mindless EDM as was his tradition, and tried to build a framework for every component he could think of without having access to the Dodger's nebulous hardware. He knew from experience that he wouldn't be able to sleep if he had enough brainpower left to lie awake and think, so he kept pushing until he was exhausted to the point of incoherence, forcing himself to comment his code and saving his revisions frequently in case he'd lost the plot at some point. His last hazy thought as he crawled into bed was that he hoped that Mai hadn't pushed herself as hard as he had. Chapter 4. Flashburn. When Izuku saw Hatsune the following morning, it was evident that she had pushed herself even harder than he had. She had her chin propped up on an unsteady hand and was squinting at the items on her desk as though they were conspiring against her. "Hey, how did you do last night?" Izuku quietly inquired as he approached. Her eyes slowly meandered up to his face, the pupils doing the breathing thing again before the light of recognition flashed across her face. "That's what I was missing," she muttered. "I decided to hedge our bets. I ordered hydraulic actuators and pneumatic cylinders, and I think I did the math for both. I sent you an email. Her eyes drifted shut as she spoke. Her torso began listing to one side, but she opened her eyes and corrected before it became a serious issue. Izuku quickly booted his laptop to find that she had in fact sent him the specs for both possible designs a few minutes ago. He was about to dig into them and build them as output modes in the rudimentary physics engine in his program when he remembered their actual assignment for the week and went to unload the metal printer. He briefly considered asking for Hatsume's help, but when he noticed her resting her head on her arms, he decided against it. Instead, he hefted the parts onto a flatbed as quietly as he could and sent the next batch of parts to the printer. Once the machine had begun to build, the green-haired boy wheeled his load to the front of the classroom and cast a final look at his sleeping partner. He smiled softly at the sight and hoped the rest of the class would not get rowdy enough to wake her. As soon as he took a step toward the door, though, Myhero-sensei sternly called his name. Midoriya, I didn't clear you to weld yet. Hatsume is supposed to be doing that. Izuku began to respond and faltered, reflecting on exactly what he intended to say. Was he about to tell a teacher to let somebody sleep in class? If he'd felt that it was an option, that's exactly what he'd do. Meanwhile, to his horror, Myhero had honed in on Mai, clearly asleep on her desk. Stayed up too late. Myhero exasperatedly finished Izuku's thought and began walking toward the dozing young woman. Probably, but I'm sure it was because there's so much to do. Izuku winced and quickly followed, continuing to plead for leniency. She taught me how to weld yesterday. I can do it as well as she can now, and Ǩēnranzaki said she was doing well enough. The perpetually shirtless hero gave Hatsume's sleeping visage an intent inspection from a few feet away. The class quieted as they realized what was going on, and Izuku quailed under their attention. Power Loader suddenly ducked lower and a little closer. Something had caught his eye. Flashburn, he scoffed. Unreal, he declared, practically spitting the word. Izuku cringed at the man's apparent anger. Myhero rounded on Izuku. Did she wear eye protection yesterday? He demanded. His intensity was jarring but unsurprising. Izuku assumed that the man was worried one of his students had damaged her eyes, and therefore her quirk. She did. Izuku nodded desperately. We both did. When Myhero didn't immediately respond, he tried to find some evidence of a problem on Mai's face. It was normal. Tired. Pink. Izuku tilted his head in wonder. She had a sunburn. You can get sunburned from welding. The whole time. Myhero prompted. The whole time. Izuku confirmed. I used one of the masks in the work bay and Hatsume used her goggles. Ǩēnranzaki even inspected them. He wrung his hands and tried to keep his voice down, both to avoid waking Mai and to avoid causing more of a spectacle than they already had. Myhero heaved a sigh. That's a rookie mistake on your senpai's part. I think I understand how she made it, but... He shook his head in disappointment. Hatsume. Myhero said, and Mai began to stir. The support hero lowered himself into her line of sight. The rest of the class wasn't even pretending not to watch at this point. Mai cracked one brilliant eye open. You look like a raccoon. The disappointment in the man's voice was palpable. Izuku puzzled over their teacher's assertion for a moment before he noticed that the outline of her goggles had left a tan line on her face. An uncertain smile crept across Hatsume's face as she squinted into the light of the workshop. Live fast, eat trash, she muttered. There was a smattering of quiet laughter from those who had been close enough to hear her. You have flashburn on your face because you didn't cover it while you were welding. You're going to use a mask like everybody else from now on, got it? Hatsume sat up and nodded through a yawn. Okay, she said quietly. She looked a little sad. You're too tired to attempt anything like welding today. Myhero declared, but it didn't seem like an admonishment. Midoriya will do it. After I make sure he actually can. From Myhero-sensei's tone, Izuku got the impression that he no longer trusted Ǩēnranzaki's judgment. He raised his voice to address the class. Since you're all paying attention anyway, when you're welding you'll use only the school-provided eye protection and you'll have no exposed skin, no exceptions. You want to be a blind mass of chumis in a jumpsuit, go do it at some other school. With that he stalked back to his desk and jabbed at his phone. Can you send Ǩēnranzaki over? She owes Hatsume an apology. There was a pause as the other person spoke. She's got flashburn, probably because 𝐭𝐻𝐻𝐿 never used anything but the full mask and 𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐿 brought some old goggles from home. There was another pause, and the next time their teacher spoke his voice had softened. No detention. I just want to get the message across. Another pause. Exactly. 𝐵𝐻𝐻𝐿 thanked the man on the other end and hung up. All right, Midoriya. Let's go see what you're working with. Izuku began following his teacher to Bay 4, but they encountered a distraught-looking 𝐭𝐻𝐻𝐿 on the way. When she saw the two of them, she bowed deeply. I'm sorry for my negligence, Myheroacademia-sensei. I've always used the masks. Myheroacademia interrupted her. And you were focused on making sure her eye protection was good enough, he guessed. 𝐭𝐻𝐻𝐿 nodded remorsefully. Her mascara had started to abandon its post. And I'm guessing you've never seen eye protection for welding without a full face mask. She shook her head. I've only ever used the equipment here, Myheroacademia-sensei. That's what I figured. He didn't seem angry, which was a huge relief to Izuku. He had had enough of angry teachers who didn't care what was fair. He liked Myheroacademia so far and hoped that it would stay that way. I just want to remind you that safety is everyone's responsibility. I know, and I'm sorry for allowing 𝐻𝐻𝐿 to be hurt. She sniffled and dabbed daintily at her eyes with a patterned handkerchief that looked like it could have been cut from the sleeve of a rather bold yukata. She wanted to use her goggles because they have sentimental value. I can't believe I forgot about her face. Her voice had started to crack. Izuku wondered how much of the older girl's grief could be attributed to the injury, slight though it may be, and how much was due to the injury being on a young woman's face, specifically. I should have stuck with what I know, even if she would have been disappointed, she finished quietly. Sometimes safety means saying no. Myheroacademia agreed gently. Yes, Myheroacademia-sensei. I'm going to apologize to 𝐻𝐻𝐿 right now, and I'm bringing something to help with the burn. She bowed one more time and then moved past them at a brisk pace. As they continued toward Bay 4, Izuku hoped that his partner hadn't already fallen asleep again. He was already conceptualizing ways to salvage Mai's goggles. Either they need to be useful for something other than welding, or they need to be turned into a full mask. Soon enough they arrived at his and Mai's little oasis, and 𝐻𝐻𝐿 asked him to demonstrate what he'd learned from the girls. All thoughts of goggles fled while he tried to gain the right to weld independently. Despite a rocky start, Izuku's morning was improving. He'd gotten some tips from Myheroacademia-sensei to improve his welding, though the hero had echoed 𝐭𝐻𝐻𝐿's assessment of Mai's style as ugly but functional. He'd stopped by his homeroom to ensure that Mai got to Japanese class on time and even managed to get some caffeine for her in the form of black tea from a vending machine. Apparently she despised the taste of coffee, which he completely understood. Izuku reflected that it was a good thing that today was Japanese rather than English. By the looks of things, Mai's tea didn't kick in until near the end of the class. He didn't want to think about her trying to cope with English on anything less than a full night's rest. At lunch, Mai was finally coherent enough to have a productive conversation. So did you do the witchcraft last night? She inquired. Izuku patted his head in confusion. You mean the program? Yes, the dark magic that brings machines to life, she said around a mouthful of chicken katsu. I got the broad strokes of it, I think. It has concepts of force, mass, acceleration, and location in 3D space. I've also got a variable in there for the height of the user. All the values are configurable, and I've got a framework built to enable multiple evasion modes. We should probably get electrodes onto you to start calibrating the muscle control mode today. We don't need a completed design to start nailing down a range for that. With that observation made, Izuku went in for another spoonful of Lunch Rush's excellent miso soup. Mai grinned dangerously. My dad warned me that boys might try to get in my breathes at UA, but it takes real guts to go straight for the weird stuff. At least buy me dinner before you break out the electrodes. Unfortunately, Izuku failed to swallow in time and instead sprayed hot soup into a hastily cupped hand while Mai cackled with delight. Oh, man! She exclaimed. I figured you'd blush, not explode. Izuku felt his face heating up as he tried to clear the salty, oily mixture from his windpipe. Oh, there's the blush. Nice. It took Izuku over a full minute to recover from the soup inhalation, during which my alternated between grinning smugly and looking apologetic for his suffering. Finally, he was able to speak. "What can I say?" He shrugged, pausing in the act of wiping soup off his hands to look at his eyes full of mischief. "I'm a sucker for girls with goggle tan and a nice cackle." Due to the aforementioned sunburn, it was impossible to tell whether he got my to blush in return, which he thought was a terrible shame. She did roll her eyes, but her smile gave the gesture away as half-hearted. "Does the flashburn hurt?" he asked, gesturing toward her face. "It's not bad. 𝐭𝐻𝐿 attacked me with some kind of goo that made it burn less while she was apologizing. Said she was sorry for damaging my skin." Mai seemed faintly amused that someone would worry about such a thing. I told her it was fine. "I guess I'll see better with the regular masks anyway." Izuku almost asked her about retooling her goggles into something more useful, but he held his tongue, suddenly thinking that he might like it to be a surprise. Perhaps he could rope 𝐭𝐻𝐿 in on the artistic side if he tried to create a mask, though he'd probably have to temper her unusual sensibilities if he did. Instead, he refocused on their actual mission. "So what do we need to fabricate for the Artful Dodger?" Just as it did on the day they met, their conversation carried them through the lunch PRD and out the door. As they sat through their math class, Izuku was pleased to note that Mai might have actually been paying attention. She was certainly alert, as evidenced by the fact that she was scribbling in a notebook. Time would tell whether her notes were relevant to the day's lesson or not. When they returned to their homeroom, they saw that Majima-sensei's desk was piled high with packages. After most of the class had trickled in, Majima called out for their attention. "Okay, parts came in for the following people: Kimura, Hatsume, Tanaka, Soto." Midoriya, Shizuku and Mai's eyes met and they grinned at each other with barely contained excitement. "And Yamamoto. If I called your name, come get your stuff. No stampeding. It's not going anywhere." Mai rushed in, but Izuku waited for the crowd to diminish. While he was waiting, Majima-sensei approached his desk and handed him a small hardshell case. "We already had the industrial cameras lying around. I ordered some more, so we'll have something to keep on the shelf, but these are yours until you're done with them." He gestured over his shoulder at the package frenzy. "That package for you should be the industrial computer. Did you ever get a hold of Snipe about the video you need?" "No." Izuku suddenly remembered. He's easily distracted. "I'll get on him for you. You've only got so many hours left to train your model." Izuku nodded nervously at his teacher. The man soon took his leave, slowly edging closer to his desk as the frenzy died down and people dispersed, giving the remaining crowd a wide berth. Mai quickly returned with her spoils, dropping an armload of packages bearing her name and one bearing his onto her desk. "Okay, now I'm awake," she declared with a gleeful smile. "Hey, Snipe finally got back to me," Izuku announced. "I guess they had to get permission from the people in the videos to share them. I now have read access to a file share with." He trailed off, clicking a few times. 300 gigs of bodycam footage. "Hell yes," he hissed. "And the real shame is that I don't have time to enjoy it and document all these cool quirks." "Nice," Mai exclaimed, landing from yet another jump. She was holding a biofeedback device which Izuku had gone from theorizing the existence of to finding in a storage bin in the space of 10 minutes. It measured and recorded the electrical impulses on the surface of someone's skin caused by the action of the muscles under said skin. It remained to be seen how difficult it would be to translate the data they were collecting into something relevant to the Dodger's programming. Mai had decided to leave the fabrication of the Dodger's body to the metal printer in the interest of saving time and ensuring quality. The printer would of course be occupied until the following morning producing the final pieces of the knuckle bench, so in the meantime they had been working on programming for the Dodger and designing the net pistol and grappling hook. Wait, what was that? Was that a jump straight forward? Izuku tore his eyes from the trove of first-person fight footage and returned to his time-stamped log of their jumping session. It was more like straight up. Do we need another forward one? He consulted the log. No, I think we've got that. Can we try really extreme jumps to the side? Mai frowned. I think I'm going to want some padding for that. Her tone changed to something more playful. The skirt is handy for all the KNKY electrode stuff, but it doesn't offer much protection from a fall. Izuku smiled at his laptop. Okay, maybe we'll postpone that until we can find gym mats. This place has like 20 different gyms. I bet there's one close to here. I think some of them are just for the hero students. Izuku replied doubtfully. You need to be keyed in. Should we pause recording? Mai inquired, eyeing the nearly 24 leads running from her legs to the box in her hands. Yeah. Stopping after one. Yep. Mai adjusted her grip on the recording device to ensure she could reach the right button. Ready. Ready. 3, 2, 1. At the appropriate moment, Izuku paused the stopwatch they'd been using and made a note of the final time. It then occurred to him to check the actual time. It's 6. What do we want to do with the remaining time? Mai tapped her chin in thought. Let's go over the drawings again while we're together. We can get some other stuff done at home. Izuku looked pointedly at Mai. And you're going to sleep at a normal time tonight, right? The pink-haired girl gave him something between a grimace and a cheeky smile. I mean, normal is relative. She shrugged as though her sleep schedule was out of her hands. Myheroacademia said he'd ban us both from working after hours or over the weekend if you show up tired again. The pointed look intensified, then shifted to something less serious but somehow more sobering. Maybe I will tell him I'm a hostage. And then where would you be? He teased. Betrayal. Mai accused, jabbing a finger at him with expertly feigned outrage. Sleep is not betrayal. It's necessary. He said firmly. What are your terms? Mai inquired suspiciously. In bed at 9:30 with no screens. That way you've got half an hour to spiral before you sleep. He offered magnanimously. An hour of spiraling, and I get to have my notebook and a small lamp. Mai countered shrewdly. Deal, he agreed, offering Mai a hand which she shook with a grin. You know, you've got a surprising amount of mom energy for a code monkey who's still in high school. I learned from the best. Izuku said sagely. Mai flashed a quick smile before returning to the drawings to ensure that her partner understood her vision. Now I know we talked about a unibody, but if we make it modular we can leave ourselves more room to screw up and print revisions of individual parts. Chapter 5. All my homies singular. Izuku was riding the train home, deep in thought when he received an email from Myheroacademia. He noticed it was addressed to Mai as well. It seemed to be an official reminder that they would not be allowed to work late or work over the weekend if either of them was seen sleeping through classes again or relying on caffeine to function. Myheroacademia had helpfully allowed Mai 1 coffee per morning with a specific ban on espresso which Izuku suspected would be replaced with tea. He was making it very clear that they could not sacrifice their health or performance in other classes in the name of the sports festival. A moment after he finished reading the email, he received a line message from Mai. Mech Maiden, lame. Izuku smiled at Mai's predictable response. Power Loader had read his mind regarding Mai's sleep situation. The green-haired boy had privately concluded that Mai's grades were not going to start strong, but he was still committed to helping her fix them after the festival was over. When he arrived home, he apprised his mother of Mai's flashburn over dinner. He also told her about the private welding lesson from Power Loader and the sleep ultimatum. He saw no reason to mention the KNKY electrode stuff he and Mai had done after school. Izuku ate quickly, determined to put in a solid evening's work before he slept. After cleaning up some of his sloppier work from the previous night, he perused the manual for the actuator Mai intended to use. To his delight, he found that the manufacturer had an open-source library written for a popular controller that Izuku had seen in storage at the school. He was tempted to begin integrating the library right away, but then he noticed some people had forked it. 2 hours later, Izuku was grinning in triumph after finding a trove of resources that would allow him to translate physical destinations to action in his program. Not for the first time, he reflected that the best kind of work was the work that was already done for you. His eyelids were pleasantly droopy as he checked the time. He was surprised to find that it was almost time for his final task of the evening, begging Mai to sleep at a decent hour. If he was honest with himself, he was more than a bit nervous about it. He picked up his phone and opened Line. To his surprise, Mai had sent a screenshot of a different part of the manual and a meme expressing confusion, followed minutes later by a different meme which featured a triumphant mad scientist. Apparently he'd been too deep in concentration to hear the messages. Scrollmite, I think I found some really nice open firmware that will work for the actuators. �MechMaiden, hell yeah �MechMaiden, we really need to figure out the relationship between force and travel. Does your spellbook have a chapter on gravity? �MechMaiden, I guess we also need a force limit to keep it from snapping me like a twig 𝐒𝐭𝐴𝐲. Yes, the program works on the assumption that gravity is a thing. I think I've got the general travel stuff figured out, but we do still need to calibrate it. Maybe we'll get a Newton meter and just punch it a few times. And I'm going to call the integrity of your spine priority �MechMaiden. Make sense. Izuku took a breath and made his move. 𝐒𝐿, so it's 9, are you in bed? �MechMaiden, what are you, the bed police? 𝐒𝐿, yes. Wee woo. You hear that siren? You're going to sleepy jail. Izuku became increasingly nervous when Mai didn't reply for a couple of minutes. Was she disgusted with him? Was she just going to ignore him? He supposed it would serve him right for thinking he could tell her what to do. He didn't know what possessed him to act so familiar with someone who'd probably just been tolerating him. His spiraling was interrupted by a trill from his phone. �MechMaiden, picture �MechMaiden, there, I'm in bed. Are you happy, you heartless tool of the establishment? Izuku flushed when he saw the photo Mai had sent. It wasn't anything inappropriate, but it felt empty. Her golden eyes were half-lidded with exhaustion, and he lamented the fact that they weren't open a little further. It would have been a great opportunity to examine them and guess at her quirk without rudely staring. She wore a long-suffering sleepy smile and a tank top, likely the one she'd worn under her uniform all day. Her pink hair spilled haphazardly over a rumpled pillowcase, and Izuku wasn't sure whether there seemed to be more hair than he remembered or whether it was just an illusion created by her supine position. The overall effect was that Izuku forgot to breathe for a moment as he took her in. The flood of relief he felt at her response and the smile that tempered her petulant words was soon accompanied by a wave of warmth and intrigue. Seeing Mai surrendering herself to rest or pretending to in order to escape his nagging made him feel close to her in a way that was new and exciting. Emboldened by the feeling, he pressed on. 𝐒𝐿, you've still got the phone. No screens, remember. �MechMaiden, but if I put the phone down I have no way to check in with my fearsome warden. Izuku grinned like an idiot. 𝐒𝐿, if you sleep properly then maybe you'll get released from sleepy jail for good behavior. Then you won't have to answer to some deranged warden anymore. �MechMaiden, you really think between the two of us that you're the deranged one? In middle school a teacher once described me as a greasy cryptid. The tired young man couldn't help but chuckle at that. 𝐒𝐿, God, I hope somebody calls me a cryptid someday. That's the dream. I bet cryptids don't have to wear ties. �MechMaiden, have you considered learning to tie it correctly? 𝐒𝐿, hurtful but valid. Knots are hard. Every time I try to do it differently it just ends up being the stupid baby tie with a giant ugly knot. Again �MechMaiden, I just do the half Windsor. It's pretty easy 𝐒𝐿, I swear that's what I'm doing. It's the half Windsor or the Buckingham half but or some other stupid English thing. �MechMaiden, thing England. All my homies hate England. 𝐒𝐿, do you have a lot of homies? �MechMaiden, nah, it's just you. I'll try to unfuck your tie for you in the morning. �MechMaiden, good night warden. Izuku stared at his phone in awe. His lips twitched at the fact that Mai had, if only jokingly, called him a friend. A homie would be a friend, right? And she'd suggested that he was her only one. He was certainly tempted to let himself think of her as a friend. If she was, she'd be his first in a very long time. He smiled as he composed his last message of the night, and it was hard to ignore the warmth he felt toward his new partner as he did. 𝐒𝐿, thanks. Sleep well and be absolved of your crimes, greasy cryptid. The next morning Izuku woke up smiling. He showered and dressed with a smile and didn't bother attempting to tie his tie. Instead he stuffed it into the pocket of his jacket and set off for school. At the train station he smiled as he quickly scanned the vending machines to see if they had anything Mai might like for her daily caffeine allotment. He kept smiling as the train bore him in the direction of UA. He was still smiling as he walked into the support wing. Not even the sudden realization that he was walking into class slightly out of uniform made his smile falter as he deposited his bag at his desk. The smile took on an edge of triumph as he unloaded the final pieces of Mount Lady's knuckle duster from the metal printer. He decided not to send the Artful Dodger to the machine just in case Mai had had a brainwave since the last time they exported the model. The first time that morning that he made a real effort not to smile was when Mai rushed in looking significantly more alert than she had yesterday. He didn't want to appear too eager to see her, but that plan fell apart as soon as she met his eyes across the room. Instead he smiled even wider as she offered him a cheeky grin of her own and zeroed in on his neck. "Oh, you're just waltzing in here sans tie like some kind of delinquent now, here." "I don't take criticism from sleep criminals," he haughtily replied. "I paid my debt to society," she said dismissively. "All right, I couldn't find anything about the Buckingham half, but so the half Windsor is going to have to do." She beckoned him forward. "Come here." Izuku withdrew the tie from his pocket and offered it to his partner as he stepped forward. Mai hummed playfully as she flipped his collar upright. "Couldn't just be satisfied with the electrodes last night, here. Now you want me to tie you up." She teased, threading the tie around his neck. "You're a bold guy, Midori." Izuku blushed at the nickname. He thought some of their classmates had turned around in surprise at her comment, but he didn't feel especially motivated to look away from her to check. He could finally see her eyes up close, and the experience was just as nice as he'd imagined. Her hair seemed like it might still be damp from the shower. He wondered if she'd woken up late and rushed out the door without drying it. As she hovered in front of him, he caught a whiff of a scent he could only describe as clean, pleasant, and oddly intoxicating. He forced himself to pull his attention from the various new stimuli so as not to let her teasing go unanswered. "You bring it out of me," he declared with a shrug and a WN smile. She grinned in response, but otherwise her concentration did not waver. As her fingers deftly danced around his collar, he reflected that he hadn't really been joking. He couldn't imagine himself talking like this with anyone but her. Mai's brow furrowed as she examined her progress. "I've never had to do it from the front before. I've got a theory on how you keep getting it wrong. You need tension at every step instead of just at the end." She seemed to be undoing the last thing she did as she said this. She paused for a moment to look him in the eye and grinned devilishly as she suddenly tightened the loop around his neck. "The safe word is persimmon," she whispered. Izuku couldn't help but laugh. Still smiling, she peered past him for a moment to examine the printer, and he noticed her pupils do the breathing thing again. That was enough for a solid theory. Optical zoom. "So did the last pieces of the knuckle bench look good?" she inquired, seemingly finishing the knot. Izuku gestured toward the finished pieces which he'd placed on her desk. She'd walked right past them without noticing. "Yeah, I didn't start on the dodger yet, just in case you wanted to make any changes." "What's the estimated print time?" "Not as bad as the knuckle pieces since it's smaller," he replied. "Looks like about 13 hours. "Ooh, start it now," she exclaimed, bouncing from one foot to another in excitement. "That way we might be able to test it tonight." "Okay." Izuku agreed with a smile. As he loaded the relevant file into the printer, he couldn't help but dwell on the scent of Mai's freshly washed hair and the feeling of her fingers ghosting over his chest. He wondered if they would ever be that close again. He was surprised at how much he hoped they would. Once the printer had begun its new task, he returned to Mai's desk where she was unpacking her laptop. "Next order of business?" he inquired. "We still need data on me jumping at harsh angles, so we need to hunt down gym mats or some other kind of padding. We need to finish our welding on the knuckle bench. We need to develop a testing plan so that we don't waste time once we've built everything. I might have time to work on the net gun and grappling hook while we're waiting for the dodger to print. We obviously have to test the SHT out of the software and calibrate all the hardware. Don't you need to train the self-driving model on all that fight footage? I tried to start that last night on the school's HPC cluster, but I've never used anything like that before, so I had to email one of the teachers for help." Izuku reported sheepishly. "I hope she gets back to me soon. Can you run it on something else?" Mai inquired, eyeing his laptop. "The cluster should be able to chew through it over 100 times faster than anything else we have access to. It's worth the wait. I can still refine things other than threat identification in the meantime. If this lady doesn't get to it by the end of the day, we might have a problem." Mai frowned. "I guess it is Friday." Izuku mused. "If she doesn't get back to me in the next hour, then I'll ask my Jima-sensei to talk to her." "So, gym mats. 10 minutes later they were standing in front of a building which proclaimed itself to be Gym Epsilon in the large, bold letters of UA's signature font. There was a smaller sign next to the doors which listed the rules of the gym: no sparring, no use of quirks. Those with mutation quirks that confer more than 3x average human strength must use one of the designated gyms. Follow all UA gym safety guidelines. They'd been told that this was one of the gyms accessible to all students, though it did appear there was an exception when it came to strength quirks. Izuku wasn't sure what the UA gym safety guidelines were, but it didn't seem likely that anything they wanted to do would conflict with them. Mai seemed entirely unconcerned about the unknown guidelines as she tapped her student ID to the lock and entered. There were exercise machines of every type, many of which Izuku had never seen before. Despite the profusion of amenities, they found the cavernous space to be almost devoid of people. A couple of older girls were engrossed in conversation on adjacent treadmills, and it appeared that they were the only occupants. While Izuku was taking in the room as a whole, Mai had zeroed in on the mat stacked in the corner. She sat her bag against the wall and began unfolding a mat while Izuku followed and began unpacking the testing apparatus. They'd been worried that the electrodes and leads might not travel well, so Mai still needed to apply them to her legs. Last time was 𝐭𝐴𝑛𝑦, but I feel like we're being extra spicy doing it with an audience. She quietly infused as she passed him to adjust the placement of the mat. Izuku felt his face warm up again. Maybe they were about to do something that violated the gym guidelines. "I can't take you anywhere," he said, smiling fondly. Eventually Mai completed the process of applying the electrodes, asking a brightly blushing Izuku to do the ones on the very backs of her thighs. He was glad she was wearing shorts underneath her uniform. He wasn't sure how he could have coped otherwise. "We need to repeat some of the jumps from before just in case the new electrode locations skew the reading somehow," Izuku declared as he finished setting up the equipment. "Ooh, good idea," Mai agreed, once again resembling a large, incomplete marionette doll. Izuku readied his notepad and stopwatch and signaled Mai to begin. Half an hour later Mai had bruises and Izuku had an email. They returned to their oasis in the support wing so that Izuku could call the teacher who administered the massive compute cluster without disturbing anyone. Here. And this has access to, Izuku trailed off as he clicked a few times. UHFS 6. There was a brief affirmation from the teacher. "Right, good. And it's already configured to use the ML accelerators." There was another pause. "Okay, thank you so much for your help." Izuku hung up and looked over the command he'd crafted one last time. "Okay, here we go." He pressed the enter key and hid most of his face behind his hands, peeking through his fingers. "What?" he said flatly, letting his hands fall limp to his sides. "What?" he hissed. "Mai," he said sharply, turning to the almost de-spaghettified girl. "What?" She jumped in alarm. "Look at this," Izuku demanded, pointing to a set of numbers on his laptop screen which seemed to be incrementing by 1,000 every few seconds. "Which part?" Mai inquired, coming closer with shuffling steps. Several wires dragged on the floor around her feet. "The frame rate," Izuku declared incredulously, pointing to a different number that seemed to be holding relatively steady. "They should have sent a poet," he whispered, clearly awestruck by what he was witnessing. "Is that a lot?" Mai ventured. "That is so many," he blurted, surprising Mai with his passion. He closed his eyes, drew a deep breath, and sighed wistfully as he watched the numbers fly along his screen. "It's going to be done in 3 hours. I love it here." "Me too," Mai replied, patting him on the back and returning to the task of ripping electrodes off her skin. After a couple more she winced and sighed. "This hurts," she admitted. "Do you think Kenranzaki has some kind of goo for it?" She'd barely finished her sentence before Izuku was out the door. Izuku nervously pulled at his hair as he power-walked toward the third-year support classrooms. He'd called Mai by her first name. She hadn't said anything about it, she hadn't even teased him about it, but that could have been because he was geeking out over some numbers on a screen like a weirdo. She'd sounded surprised at the time, but was that because of what he'd said, or the urgency with which he'd said it? The really chilling thing about the whole situation was the fact that her name hadn't felt unnatural coming out. It was like he'd said it before. Had he woken up that morning with her name on his lips? Had he whispered it like a half-conscious prayer before he'd fallen asleep last night? He surveyed the hallway and found that no one was near him. My. He formed the word quietly. It felt just as natural as a good morning or a thank you. He suddenly remembered that she had patted him on the back after he'd called her my. Maybe, just this once, he was worrying too much. Thankfully Mai seemed no different when he came back with one of Ǩēnrāndzēkī's various balms in tow. In fact, she seemed grateful for the favor. A few minutes into the lunch period, he was able to shake the thought of his slip-up. It helped that he and Mai had plenty to talk about. After lunch they set about the task of welding the last pieces onto the knuckle bench, taking turns so that they could both get more practice. As the last weld cooled, they surveyed their massive weapon with pride. "Should we try it?" Izuku asked. Mai answered by perching on the bench and wiggling slightly to achieve maximum comfort. Not bad, she decided. Izuku took a seat next to her. "I don't consider myself a bench connoisseur, but this seems like a decent bench." He smiled. He'd never made anything big enough to sit on before. "Now we just need to get it to Mount Lady for testing. Though I suppose we could take it to ground beta and drop it a few stories onto some pavement, but then we'd be delivering it to Mount Lady with scratches." She kicked at the ground in disappointment. "That's not very good customer service, even if we're not charging. We'd have to borrow a crane." Izuku posited. "I bet there would be paperwork." "We have no time for paperwork." Mai scoffed. "We've got much bigger things to worry about." A few hours of planning and designing later, Mai and Izuku sat in front of the metal printer. Their classmates had almost all left. The few that remained were finishing up their projects for the first week. 80 minutes. Izuku murmured, looking at the time remaining on the printer's display. The pieces of the Artful Dodger sat tantalizingly close. The shorter ones were already complete, but they'd have to wait until the tallest piece was done to claim their prizes. "Maybe we should eat dinner now so we can test right up until we go home," he suggested. The cafeteria had long since closed, but he was pretty sure there were other options near the campus. "Ooh, good idea. I forget dinner sometimes. Isn't there a yakitori place down the street?" Izuku filed the information about her forgetting to eat away for later. "I think so. I can go pick it up." "Hell yeah." Mai cheered. She got up and began digging through her backpack. "I think I have like 600 yen in here somewhere. I'll buy." Izuku offered. "I mean, I'm about to put you in a HNS, and you did say I should buy you dinner before asking for 𝐭𝐴𝐽 stuff, right?" He smiled cheekily. "I've taught you well," Mai observed with a smug grin. As Izuku walked to the restaurant, he saw a few other students who seemed to be making the same pilgrimage. Some were in their uniforms, but others were in jumpsuits, almost certainly second and third year support students. When he arrived, he gave his name to the man working the register. The man peered at the grill being tended by his colleague and declared that it would be another moment. While he was waiting, he noticed that all the people in jumpsuits were waiting for carryout while the people dining at the few tables were in uniform. There were some uniforms waiting for takeout, but they were in the minority. He wondered if any of the students eating there would be returning to UA or whether they were finished for the week. Standing out in the sea of UA uniforms and jumpsuits were 3 older students in UA tracksuits. There was a tall, broadly built blonde boy whose features suggested that he must have had at least one parent from abroad, a boy with dark hair and pointed ears, and a girl with hair so long that he wondered if it was somehow related to her quirk. The dark-haired boy seemed to shrink from the crowd. He cast longing looks toward the pavement outside while the other 2 were conversing with perfect ease. The blonde boy noticed his friend's distress and clapped him on the back. "Oh, cheer up. The wings will be worth it. Chickens can't fly, Mirio. I don't know how many times I have to tell you. I could have just had the quail from lunch," he said sulkily. "But it's better when it's fresh, right?" The girl enthused. It was a confusing line of reasoning. The boy didn't want to eat chicken because chickens couldn't fly. But then he realized that he'd seen the boy's face before. It must have been in one of the body camera videos he'd perused before feeding it into the neural network on the compute cluster. The boy's arms had ended in tentacles in that video. Standing in the restaurant and clearly wishing he was elsewhere, his arms looked as normal as Izuku's, aside from being larger and more toned. Izuku was awestruck with the implications. He is what he eats. That's an incredible quirk. Before he could observe the group of hero students any further, he was summoned to claim his food. He quickly set off for the school in the hope that it would still be hot by the time he got to Mai. After Izuku returned with their skewers of chicken and mounds of rice, he found that he and Mai were the only ones left. They pushed Mai's desk next to the metal printer and ate their dinner while they watched its progress. Izuku thought the food was good, but he decided that Mai's excitement over it was better. He would definitely remember that yakitori was one of her favorites. He wondered if he could use it in the future to mitigate her tendency to skip meals. As soon as the pink-haired girl had eaten her fill, she set about clearing a workspace and arranging the necessary tools and components for the assembly process. She didn't want to waste a moment. "I'm glad you already did the hard part," she remarked as she returned a tool to the wall of the classroom in favor of the same thing in a different size. "I can't stand programming. If an English teacher made me use a semicolon, I'd be upset. If a computer made me use one, I would riot. Well, I wouldn't say I'm done with the programming." Izuku hemmed. "And I know I couldn't do what you've done," he said, shaking his head emphatically. "You have the spatial reasoning skills of a Swiss watchmaker or something. I would have been too afraid to touch half the things you've done. Look at my watch and tell me I'm on par with the Swiss." Mai deadpanned, holding her chunky homemade timepiece out for examination. "This is practically a sundial. This arm is probably stronger than the other one by now. The Swiss made some heavy watches," Izuku reminded her. "They were heavy because they nearly bent the laws of physics to cram all that clockwork in there. They were also waterproof and built to outlive humanity. Mine is heavy because I'm impatient and so bad at soldering that I don't think I can take it apart anymore." "You said you made that a couple years ago," Izuku protested. "If you made one now, I bet it would be smaller. If I wanted to make a watch now, I'd just buy one of the smartwatch kits and machine a cool casing for it. I'm old and boring now," she lamented, mournfully biting one more piece of chicken off of her last skewer. Izuku scoffed. "You literally told a teacher to live fast and eat trash yesterday." Mai barked out a laugh. "Ha! I didn't I?" she mused proudly. There were mere moments to go on the Artful Dodger print job now. Mai seemed to be breathing deeply in an effort to center herself. "We need assembly music," she decreed, pulling out her phone. Izuku scurried off to grab the boombox from Bay. In theory, they wouldn't be disturbing anyone if they used it in the classroom. The adjacent classroom was probably completely empty anyway. When Izuku returned, Mai was grinning maniacally at the printer. The build sequence had completed in the short time he was gone. He was a little surprised that Mai hadn't already begun taking pieces out. When she saw him, she gestured dramatically toward the printer and pressed the play button on her phone, filling the room with very old rock music. Only when Izuku was near enough to help did she open the enclosure and begin taking pieces out, singing along to the music that Izuku was pretty sure he'd heard before. "So you can sing in English, but you have trouble with the homework?" he asked suspiciously, raising his voice slightly to be heard. "Hey," she protested. "You know it's different. A parrot could speak English. Doesn't mean they understand anything." Mai began assembling their magnum opus, joyously singing and bobbing as she worked. Izuku wasn't surprised to discover that Mai had a powerful singing voice, but she still managed to apply it in a way that impressed him. When the right song came along, she belted the words she knew, pouring real passion into each one despite probably not even knowing what she was saying. All Izuku could do was entertain Mai by relying on his falsetto to make wild stabs at some of the high notes. He knew he couldn't sing, but making Mai laugh was probably more fun anyway. Eventually Izuku asked if he could play some of his favorites. The rock music had started to sound a little samey to him, though he knew if he admitted as much to Mai she would ridicule him endlessly for implying that EDM and dance pop were anything but samey. She enthusiastically agreed, not knowing what she was in for. Izuku decided to open strong with one of his favorites. There were no words, but he didn't feel that it needed any. As soon as Mai heard the synthetic rhythms and pounding bass, she scoffed and began teasing him. "Oh, you're one of those, here. You can't argue with a beat like that," Izuku protested. "Can something with no soul even argue?" Mai inquired playfully, returning to her work. "It's just a beat. No words, No soul. Izuku opened his mouth to defend his choice, but when he saw what Mai was doing he realized he didn't have to. So what's your foot doing, then? He slyly inquired. Mai stilled her tapping foot for a second and then gave up the struggle, allowing her hips to sway slightly with the rhythm as she worked. The monkey brain likes a beat, we can't fight that, she declared airily. And why should we? Izuku inquired smugly. Mai pursed her lips but couldn't stop the gesture from turning into a smile before she rolled her eyes and returned to her wiring, feet tapping and hips bobbing. 2 songs later Mai was drumming on the workbench and Izuku was right there next to her on backing vocals, thrashing his voice with pure joy. Several hours later Izuku was blinking unsteadily and suspiciously at his work, not entirely certain that it would hold still if he looked away from it. Mai, he rasped tiredly. The room was nearly silent. Mai's phone had died at some point and they may have been too distracted to plug it in. Heh, she replied, equally dazed. I don't remember what I'm doing. Do you? He whispered, it was all he could manage. He had utterly destroyed his voice earlier during the assembly sing-along. There was a brief silence. What? He let out a small huff of frustration and laboriously rolled his stool closer to Mai so that she could hear his severely depleted voice better. I said I don't remember what I'm doing. Do you? She looked at the items in front of her with only the barest hint of recognition. No. I think I had something, but it's gone. She sighed, her voice thick with exhaustion. We should probably get out of here. She checked her massive watch. Oh, we definitely missed the train. Do you live nearby? Tohashi. Mai reported flatly. I think the taxi ride would bankrupt me. Izuku nodded in silent agreement. He furrowed his brow and thought for a moment. He knew what he wanted to do, but he wasn't sure how Mai would react. The exhausted young man sighed and decided that there was nothing left to do but try. Today had been a good day. If he made a fool of himself, Mai would probably forgive him. Had he been less tired he might have taken more care with his phrasing, but speaking felt unpleasant so he decided to be economical with his words. I live in town. 20-minute walk. We have a couch. Do you want to come home with me? Mai smiled and seemed to take a moment to compose her thoughts. Still a bold guy. Whispering in my ear, inviting me back to your place, assuming I can still walk. All bold moves. She giggled. Sure. If you can get me there, I'll go. Izuku hummed in contemplation, though he sounded a bit like a broken air compressor. Maybe I'll put you on a flatbed and just push you. There's a joke in there somewhere. Mai yawned. We should probably start walking. Or pushing, in your case. Izuku couldn't help but yawn back. He attempted to say, let's go, but his voice gave out halfway through the first word. After a few minutes of blearily rounding up the necessary items to take home, time would tell whether they had left anything important behind. They set off. As they passed the upper year support classrooms they ran into a couple of upperclassmen who seemed to be leaving as well. Whoa, you guys are still here, the taller of the 2 boys inquired. Gotta get ready for the festival. Mai slurred. Aren't you first years? The stranger incredulously inquired. Yes. Izuku rasped. But where? He trailed off, both unsure of what he wanted to say and worried about his ability to say it. Too powerful, Mai began, and paused, seemingly considering her words, to be contained by tradition. She finished. Can taxes come to the gate? Izuku whispered. Mai's too sore to walk. Where are you headed? Northeast Musutafu. Izuku replied. Is that it? The boy cast his eyes to the ground in thought for a moment. If it's in town and she really can't walk, I guess I could just take you in one of the groundskeeping trucks. The boy waved off his companion who continued past them, presumably on his way home for the night. Is that allowed? Mai asked warily. Mon probation. Academic. Izuku interjected at the older boy's look of concern. He really wished people would stop forcing him to speak. Should we tell him I just got out of sleepy jail? Mai stage whispered. Izuku was racked with puffs of silent laughter. Anyway, the older boy continued, if you're conducting UA business and you've got a license, which I do, you can check out one of the K trucks, he informed them with a small measure of pride. I think getting first eyes who look like they've had 4 drinks home safely counts as UA business. He their-eyed with thin-lipped concern. No drinks, only dreams. Mai protested. She suddenly ped her head and narrowed her eyes in thought. I might be dehydrated. Izuku immediately began searching for a vending machine while the older boy appeared to be both concerned and amused. Let's get you home. Their senpai introduced himself as Suzuki Shiro and ushered them out of the main building to a relatively unmanicured area on the outskirts of the campus. They were soon led to a large shed which contained more than 24 K trucks, most of which were positively ancient. Izuku thought some of them might be older than him and might put together. They're so cute. Mai whispered at the little mechanical workhorses they'd seen puttering along the sidewalks around campus. She grabbed her partner's sleeve and tugged it urgently while gesturing toward the trucks. Izuku, look at the Barbies. Izuku nodded mechanically in agreement. Now that he knew he had a ride home, some of his higher faculties seemed to be deserting him for the night. When you get to second year you'll have to start maintaining these things. Suzuki reported, eyeing his choices and then walking over to a locker and entering a code to reveal a cornucopia of keys. This is where the trucks sleep. Mai whispered seriously. This is their sleepy jail, she declared, dissolving into giggles. Izuku squinted fondly at her. We're pretty sure the only reason they don't replace them with something more modern is that they want to make sure we get plenty of practice. He paused suddenly as he approached his chosen truck. Right, just 2 seats. He frowned as he looked back at the 2 partners. And riding in the back is definitely illegal. Izuku awoke to the sound of an unfamiliar voice calling his name and the feeling of something heavy and warm in his lap. Midoriya, the voice repeated, is this the right place? The exhausted young man maneuvered his head past Mai's hair and squinted out the window of the tiny vehicle. Eventually he was able to resolve the small green space at the entrance of his apartment complex. Yeah. His mouth formed the syllable but nothing came out. He closed his eyes, deciding that he had fulfilled his obligation by answering. Man, you're fried. Are you even gonna remember which one is yours? The voice muttered. Izuku thought the question may have been rhetorical but he wasn't certain. He decided to wait and see. The voice suddenly changed location and a distinctly unwelcome light spilled through his eyelids. Gotta wake her up now, unless you're strong enough to lift her. Izuku groaned in response to the light and assigned his remaining brain cells to the task of parsing the onslaught of questions. Where do I live? Izuku was pretty sure the answer to that one was a number and he'd know it when he saw it. Can I lift my? He let out a small huff of amusement. His muscle mass would probably fit on the 100 yen menu at a fast food joint. Midoriya, are you with me? The voice inquired, and to Izuku's consternation the voice seemed to find the whole thing amusing. Izuku scowled as much as his overused face muscles would allow. He had had a very plus ultra sort of day and he really had no patience for people doubting or criticizing him at the moment. He briefly reflected on the fact that he himself was people, a person, who was doubting him. Couldn't he lift my? It was perhaps a testament to the depth of his fanboyism that some of his remaining brain cells rallied to pose the question of what All Might would do in this situation. He thought back to the thing that had inspired him most, the video of the as yet unknown All Might carrying multiple people out of harm's way and going back for more, over and over. The matter was settled. Glossing right over the fact that they were not in any danger and that it would have been perfectly sensible to wake Mai up and ask her to walk the short distance inside, he opened his eyes, unbuckled his and Mai's seatbelt, and maneuvered a foot onto the pavement. With some effort he wriggled out from under Mai and even managed to avoid falling over as he exited the tiny vehicle. Without giving himself or the amused-looking Suzuki time to question the plan, he wedged one hand behind Mai's back and the other under her legs and heaved, trying to ensure that her head would land on his shoulder instead of lolling backward. Oh fuck! Izuku wheezed as his underutilized yet thoroughly exhausted string-bean body threatened to buckle under the weight of an adolescent girl. Loud complaints were coming from muscle groups which he hadn't even thought would be involved in the lifting process as he took urgent, shuffling steps toward his apartment. He was sure he was less than 30 seconds away from dropping her. And because Izuku wasn't finished being a dumbass, he realized that he had failed to get his house key out of his pocket. Thankfully Suzuki had decided to follow him after he lifted Mai out of the truck. He had been reaching out to assist, reconsidering, recoiling, wringing his hands in concern and then starting the 𝐂𝐤𝐤𝐿. "Help!" Izuku hissed, leveling an intense, plaintive stare at the older boy as he stood near the door and hoped that he didn't need to use any more breath to explain the problem. When Suzuki paused for a moment, Izuku jerked his head downward and to the right to indicate which pocket held his salvation. "Keys," he croaked. Suzuki scrambled to his beleaguered Kohai's side and gingerly reached into his pocket, finding the key and hurriedly unlocking the door. He swung the door open but did not precede the younger boy. He wasn't about to enter uninvited. Izuku's arms quaked as he shuffled sideways through the narrow entryway toward the living room and the couch. This was the hardest, dumbest thing he'd ever done, and he was so close to the finish line. Finally he dropped to one very wobbly knee and gently lowered her onto the little sofa they'd had for as long as he could remember, cradling her head until it met the armrest. Izuku could only assume that his face was purple during that final maneuver. When the dust had settled, he was taking the quietest gulps of air he could, one hand still solidly pinned beneath Mai's upper back. He was pretty sure he could get the one under her legs free easily enough, but he just wanted to rest for a moment before he tried to extricate himself. He laid his head on the edge of the couch, the spasmodic twitching of his burning muscles tapering off as his body began to relax. He could feel the warmth of Mai's body against the top of his head. He hazily reflected that while it was odd smelling Mai and smelling home at the same time, it was by no means unpleasant. The last things that slipped through Izuku's mind before it went blank were the clatter of his keys sliding across the entryway floor, the voice of Suzuki quietly bidding him good night, and the soft squelch of the door closing. The distant sound of a UAK truck departing was lost on him as he slept with Mai in his arms for the first time. Chapter 6. 2 breakfasts and a girl. Midoriya Inko woke to the sound of her front door opening. By the time she'd fully regained her senses, she heard what sounded like a pair of keys hitting the floor and the door closing. The complete silence that followed struck her as odd. Surely Izuku would pick up the keys. He was a very good boy, not the type to leave a mess. He'd said he would be home late, but she really hadn't expected his work to last beyond 9 or so. That was around the time she remembered getting in bed. She checked the time and was shocked to find that it was nearly 1 in the morning. The trains would have stopped running hours ago. She quickly roused herself to check on Izuku and ask him what had kept him at school so late. She smiled as she wondered if his new partner might have had something to do with him losing track of time. The sight that greeted her in the living room was unexpected, confusing, and upon closer inspection, adorable. "When you're right," she mused. She silently approached the appealing tableau and tried to take it all in. The girl on the couch could only be Hatsune Mai. Inko would bet quite a bit of money that behind the girl's eyelids were the gold crosshair-patterned irises her son had described with red-cheeked excitement. Izuku's left arm was pinned beneath his new friend's back and his right was resting underneath her legs, which were slowly settling into place. Did he carry her inside? Izuku's head was butted up against the girl's side and his face was pressed into the couch. Inko couldn't imagine it was easy for him to breathe, yet he made no move to alleviate the issue. Neither of them had even removed their shoes. She covered her mouth and silently laughed at the spectacle. After retrieving Izuku's keys and locking the door, she naturally snapped a few pictures. It was the most scrapbookable thing she'd ever seen. Still smiling at the wonderful, hopeful scene that now graced her living room, she set out in search of a blanket for the two and a pillow for Izuku. As adorable as Izuku's pose of supplication was, she wasn't sure if he'd consider the back and neck pain in the morning to be worth the price. Inko created a ramp out of 2 pillows next to Izuku and began gently pulling his arm out from under Hatsume's back. The girl unconsciously wriggled against the interference, unwittingly helping the process along. With both arms freed, she eased Izuku onto the pillows and then slowly removed the bottom one. Finally he was in a position which didn't promise pain in the morning. Standing at the kid's feet and preparing to throw a blanket onto them in the stealthy way that mothers sometimes did, she noticed the bruises on Hatsume's legs. Now she could see why Izuku would have carried her. The fact that Izuku could carry the girl at all was hard to fathom. He was getting so big now, her little boy was nearly a man. As she peered down at him, she could see flashes of the tiny thing he used to be, curled up on that very same couch without even eclipsing one of its cushions. It had been so many years since she'd been able to pick him up, and she missed the feeling dearly. She was glad to think that he might have a way to experience it for himself now. Bursting with happiness for her Izuku, she threw the blanket and held the nearest edges so that it settled onto the slumbering teens just right. In the silent gloom of a cozy two-bedroom apartment not far from UA, two indistinct lumps recovered from a very busy day. For the first time in several hours, one of the lumps broke the silence. Izuku, the higher of the two lumps, whispered into the darkness. The young man in question did not stir. "Izuku!" Mai whispered a bit more forcefully. At this, the lower of the two lumps awoke. It didn't move, but it did speak. "Mai," the lump rasped. The higher lump shifted on its perch. "Are you on the floor?" Mai inquired with confusion. "Apparently," Izuku observed, though less than half of the word actually came out. "Oh. Well, I have to pee, and I'm really thirsty." "Oh." He attempted to tell her that the bathroom was at the end of the hall, but quickly realized that his voice was cutting out too much to be intelligible. There was a brief pause. "I can't see in the dark. It's part of my quirk." "Oh," Izuku replied. That was very interesting, and he hoped that he assimilated the information properly despite his exhaustion. He hazily concluded that he couldn't just tell Mai where to go. His voice wasn't behaving, and she'd probably bump into things even if she could hear him. He also knew that the living room light was very bright, and he wasn't sure how Mai's quirk might react if he suddenly turned it on. Some of the brain cells that had recovered during Izuku's short rest had noted his needlessly heroic effort to get Mai inside without waking her. They were impressed with the all-might fanboy brain cells' bravado, though they did feel that their carry Mai inside plan was severely lacking in the area of self-preservation. Based on these observations, this second night shift of brain cells suggested a course of action that was bold but less likely to lead to injury. Izuku sat up, the blanket clinging to his torso and exposing one of Mai's shoulders as he moved. He lifted the blanket further to reveal her arm and a hand, which he gently took with his own. He rose to his feet and stood in such a way that Mai wouldn't be able to bump into the coffee table when she joined him. He watched her shadowy form as she kicked off the blanket, cautiously swung her feet onto the floor, and attempted to stand. Mai gasped and squeezed his hand almost painfully hard. "Holy everything hurts," she hissed in shocked amusement as she wobbled in place, her legs threatening to strike until their working conditions improved. He quickly moved to support her, nudging his pillow aside with his foot and leading Mai with small, shuffling steps toward the bathroom as she emmed pitifully with pain. "Is this what exercise is like every time? Why would anyone do this?" she whispered. Izuku expelled a few puffs of silent laughter that ended up somewhere in Mai's hair. He paused at the door frame, pivoting her around his hip slightly so that he could reach the light SWCH. "Light," he rasped. He saw the vague shape of her head nodding in the darkness. He swayed the light on and swore he could hear faint clicks from Mai's head as she blinked and squinted at the newly illuminated bathroom. After giving her a moment to get used to it, he shuffled through the door sideways and deposited her on the toilet lid. "Help?" he asked with trepidation. Mai cringed and let out a short, pained groan. "2KNKY." She took a quick inventory of her surroundings and motioned for him to go. "I'll figure it out." Izuku left her, closing the door behind him. He walked softly to the kitchen, willing himself to block out any sounds from the bathroom short of a plea for help. He drew a glass of water and then another, chugging half of the second glass before putting it down. He made a conscious decision not to check the time lest he make himself too anxious to sleep. The tired young man returned to the living room where he sat the full glass on the coffee table for Mai. He heard the bathroom door open and turned to find Mai leaning against the frame, blinking blearily in his direction. He quickly returned to her side and wrapped an arm around her, trying to take as much of her weight as he could while they shuffled back to the couch. After he sat her down and pressed the glass of water into her hands, he immediately returned to the bathroom and rummaged through the medicine cabinet for low-grade painkillers. He turned off the light and returned to Mai, the slight rattle of the bottled pills heralding his approach. "Painkillers," he whispered, grasping her empty hand and depositing 2 pills in her palm. She gave a small grunt of gratitude and tossed the pills back, washing them down with the water. blinked a few times at nothing in particular and then cautiously held the glass out as though offering it to the coffee table. Izuku took the glass and she pet her head in response. "You can really see me," she wondered aloud as he deposited the glass on the table. Before Izuku could answer, Mai held her arms out and made what he could only describe as grabby hands in his general direction. If it had been just one hand he would have reached out and taken it to reassure her that he was still there, but two hands, a hug. He smiled to himself in the dark and moved in to oblige her. He didn't think there was much he would deny Mai, and a hug certainly wasn't something he would protest. Moments like this made it almost seem like Mai appreciated the way he cared for her. His smile fell as he wondered whether he'd wake up soon and discover that this was a dream. The dreamlike quality of the moment ratcheted up several notches when Mai grabbed him and heaved herself backward onto the couch, hauling Izuku down with her. "Gotcha," she whispered playfully. "You don't have to sleep on the floor," she murmured into his hair. "You can be my little spoon," she giggled. Izuku was deeply confused and pleasantly disoriented. Based on prior experience, his whole body should have been on fire with panic. Instead he was comfortably submerged in the sensory experience of Mai. He could feel the weight of her arm wrapped around him as she gently squeezed him closer, her hair tickling his face. He could feel the rise and fall of her chest and her breath whispering over the crown of his head. His own breaths brought him a fresh dose of her scent, and if it had been intoxicating that morning, had that really been less than 24 hours ago? Now it was like his brain had been fully replaced by essence of Mai. His newly emptied head felt appropriately light, but his eyelids were heavy as the warmth and softness of Mai's body sapped his will to think. If someone had asked him yesterday whether he'd be able to get a wink of sleep in a girl's arms, he would have said no, citing his extraordinary ability to spiral in self-doubt and his lack of trust in others. Lost in Mai's embrace, Izuku was asleep in seconds. Izuku awoke to the smell of breakfast. Eyes still shut, he furrowed his brow in confusion and inhaled purposefully through his nose. 2 kinds of breakfast. On a Saturday. Normally Sunday was the day for auspicious breakfasts in the Midoriya household, but at that moment he swore he could smell miso and pancakes of all things. He inhaled again and his eyes flew open. Miso and pancakes and Mai. Before his eyes had even focused he registered a few locks of pink hair tumbling over his shoulder and a slender but toned arm curled protectively around him. Mai had held him while he slept. He didn't have much time to appreciate his circumstances before he noticed his mother standing beside the dining table and staring at him, fists curled under her chin with barely contained excitement. Her grin was the widest he'd ever seen it, and she seemed to be making a conscious effort not to show her teeth. She was positively vibrating with doting mom energy and using her quirk to levitate a plate of pancakes near his head like improvised smelling salts. He lifted a hand and offered her a tentative little wave. He'd brought a girl home in the middle of the night, slept with her, and did not appear to be in trouble. An uninformed bystander might conclude that Izuku's transgression was being rewarded with pancakes, but Izuku knew that breakfast was just the form that his mother's irrepressible hospitality instincts had taken. Mai was the cause of this feast, not him. The pancakes floated back to Inko's hand and soon joined the others on the table. Before Izuku was able to gather his thoughts, Mai began to stir. She stretched languidly, wincing slightly as she jostled her bruised legs against his. He shifted to give her more room and turned to face her with a mixture of affection and apprehension. After Mai's body finished its boot sequence, her eyes fluttered open and she finally seemed to register Izuku's presence. "Hey," she said with a Cheshire grin. Suddenly her nostrils flared and her eyes narrowed. "Is there food?" she asked conspiratorially. Izuku smiled and nodded wordlessly, all too happy to distract her from discussing their sleeping arrangement. He rose from the couch and took a moment to stretch himself, intending to offer Mai a hand when he finished. Apparently the combination of painkillers and the prospect of food was sufficient to get Mai moving under her own power, because when he opened his eyes after a ferocious yawn he found that she'd already gotten halfway to the table without him. "Good morning, you two. It's nice to meet you, Hatsune. I wasn't sure what you like to eat for breakfast, so I tried to cover my bases." Inko reported with a flush of pride, taking her accustomed seat at the table. Izuku noticed that she'd gone to even more effort than he thought. The pancakes had chocolate chips, the miso had tofu and seaweed, there were eggs, and she'd somehow even found time to pickle some cabbage. He wondered whether this was the most surreal way Mai had ever met someone. Somehow he doubted it. "Thanks, Midoriya," Mai said as she sat down. "You can call me Mai." She then set upon her pancakes with gusto, studiously ignoring the cabbage. Izuku smiled as his mom insisted that Mai call her 𝐭𝐴. He wished he could be at ease with people the way Mai was. Morning, he rasped in his mother's direction. 𝐭𝐴's mood instantly shifted to concern. "What's wrong with your voice? Are you sick? Did something happen at school?" Izuku gave Mai a pleading look. "He lost it because we were singing too loud last night," Mai explained with a grin. "He's got some pipes, or he had some, before he wrecked them on all that catchy garbage music." Izuku blushed crimson and 𝐭𝐴 relaxed slightly. "Did you go to karaoke after school?" she wondered. Mai laughed and Izuku had the grace to look embarrassed. "No, we were just jamming while we were making our baby." Izuku froze and his life flashed before his eyes. He had never mentioned Mai's habit of referring to inventions as babies to his mother, whose eyebrows had begun to twitch. He had seconds to resolve the impending crisis and he barely had a voice with which to defend himself. "Make every syllable count." "The Dodger," he rasped. "Oh," 𝐭𝐴 sighed with relief. Thankfully she hadn't had enough time to work herself into a real panic. "How is it coming along?" Mai opened her mouth to answer and then snapped it shut, staring straight through her pancakes without seeing them. "I don't remember," she realized. She looked to Izuku with concern only to find him squinting at his own pancakes and clearly finding no answers among them. He made a thoughtful noise and it came out heavily distorted by his ailing vocal cords. 𝐭𝐴 nudged a bowl of miso closer to her son. "See if it helps your throat, sweetie." He nodded and took a sip of the warm broth. It felt good, so he took another. He felt like he'd slurped down about half a sentence worth of vitality, so he tried his luck. "We built it," he recalled, then took it apart. He offered hesitantly, his voice jumping in odd directions and breaking as the soup-induced fortitude was depleted. Mai nodded slowly. "That sounds right, but I don't remember why we took it apart." Izuku pensively sipped some more broth. "How are your legs?" he inquired. The concern on Izuku's face was clear as he spoke, and 𝐭𝐴 couldn't help but notice. "Oh, that's right," she interjected. "I was going to ask what happened to them." She wrung her hands. "I saw the bruises," she said sympathetically, mirroring her son's look of concern. "They're okay," Mai replied. "Casualty of the scientific process. We needed data so I took a dive, and then I took 10 more. I hope you don't have to take any more dives before the festival. You need time to heal up," 𝐭𝐴 said apprehensively. Mai frowned and prodded at her eggs thoughtfully. "Yeah, I guess I'm screwed if I practice and screwed if I don't." She looked bleakly at Izuku who made a noise of concern. He reached for his phone and began to text her that they would make a plan to save her stamina, but then remembered that her phone had died last night. He wiggled his phone while pointing at Mai. "Oh, right." Mai understood and fished her own phone from the pocket of her uniform. "This thing is super dead." She handed it to Izuku who took it off to his room to charge it. "So, Mai, what's your favorite part of UA so far?" 𝐭𝐴 inquired, her eyes glittering with interest. "Izuku," Mai answered simply and without delay. Had she been paying attention to 𝐭𝐴 instead of her food she might have noticed the older woman's borderline predatory smile. "The work bays are really nice too, though, so I guess it's a tie. It's nice being able to see where all the tools are because I haven't lost them yet. I think I might buy some pegboard for home," she mused. Izuku walked back into the room to find Mai finally getting to her soup and his mom grinning strangely. "So, are you two going back today?" 𝐭𝐴 inquired. "I know you said there was a lot to do." "Oh yeah, we've got to figure out what the hell we did last night." Mai nodded seriously. "Do you think you'll be staying late again?" 𝐭𝐴 inquired, and as Izuku sat down he had a feeling she was leading them somewhere. "Probably," Mai said happily. "Maybe we'll set a reminder for 11:30 so I can catch the last train tonight. We probably can't rely on running into K-Truck-senpai again." "Suzuki," Izuku supplied, then frowned. She had a point. Last night had been a very special set of circumstances, but as harrowing as it was on paper, he wouldn't have changed a single thing about it. Pretty sure it was a Daihatsu, Mai said with a doubtful glance at Izuku. He smiled fondly at Mai's priorities. She remembered the model of the truck that had carried them here but not the name of the person who'd driven it. Do you take the bullet train home, Mai? 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲 asked. Yep. Mai replied with a grin. I like trains, so I don't mind the long trip every day. Izuku filed Mai's love of trains away for later. He rested his chin in his hand and idly wondered what model trains cost. He'd gotten the impression at some point that it was an expensive hobby. He was unaware that he was staring affectionately at Mai as he drifted. Oh, where do you live? 𝐒𝐭𝐴 inquired, absolutely having caught the way her son looked at the girl in question. Tohashi, Mai declared around her last bite of eggs. Oh. Well, it's no wonder you didn't go back last night, then. That would have been a long ride. She nodded sympathetically. Expensive, too. I'm glad Izuku brought you over. She smiled warmly at Mai and took a sip of her tea. 𝐒𝐭𝐴 seemed almost painfully nonchalant when she spoke again, and now Izuku could see her plan being set in motion. You know, you're welcome to stay here while you're preparing for the festival as long as your family is okay with it. I think Izuku was planning to ask if you'd like to join us to watch the festival highlights next week anyway. She said breezily as though she wasn't single-mindedly pursuing the clearest path to grandchildren. Izuku's eyes widened in astonishment and flicked between the two women. He hadn't exactly felt like he was in control of the situation to begin with, but 𝐒𝐿's sudden offer wasn't helping. Oh, there's nobody home anyway. Mai shrugged. My dad's in Indonesia for the next few weeks. They got a bullet train like 10 years ago and then didn't take care of it because they're idiots, so he's trying to fix it for them. Izuku couldn't help but laugh quietly at Mai's save. He was a little surprised that she even cared about swearing in front of his mom, but maybe she held parents in higher esteem than teachers. He frowned as he realized that with Mai's father away there was probably no one around to make Mai eat properly. Maybe there was something to his mom's plan. It seemed that 𝐒𝐿 had had the same thought, because her plotting had given way to genuine concern. Oh, then please stay with us at least through the festival. I can try to make sure you two have enough food to keep. You going? Mai looked to Izuku, who managed to get over his shock quickly enough to smile and nod his agreement. Okay, she said, returning Izuku's smile. Mai was a simple girl. She liked things that were interesting and she had little patience for things that weren't. She liked food that was greasy or spicy and rarely encountered a vegetable on her own terms. She collected broken things because she intended to fix them, and she dreamed of a world in which every broken thing could be fixed. She did not have many friends. In fact, before Izuku she'd had no friends her age at all for several years. She mostly didn't worry about that, but sometimes when it was late at night and the house was silent and her father had long since bade her good night via text message because he was over 1,000 miles away, she was lonely. She would wish sometimes that she had someone to show her babies to, someone who would really appreciate them. Before Izuku she hadn't had that in a long time. She remembered the awe in the other kids' faces when she'd first brought her tools to school and fixed broken things in her classroom. She remembered swelling with pride when the other kids started bringing her broken things from their own homes. She remembered the confusion and desolation she'd felt when her teacher had noticed her efforts and confiscated her tools. Her first reaction was actually abject fear because those tools belonged to her father and he needed them. She had demanded that the teacher give them back, and when that hadn't gotten her anywhere she demanded to know why they would steal someone's tools. Taking someone's tools without asking was very disrespectful unless you lived with them and they could be reasonably sure you'd put them back when you were done with them. The teacher had told her that school was not the place for tools because they were dangerous. Mai had insisted that tools were only dangerous to stupid people, and she wasn't stupid. The teacher had argued that it didn't matter how smart Mai was because one of the other children could have hurt themselves. Many years later Mai would reflect that her teacher's argument had been too reductive. It probably wasn't so much about tools in school as it was the fact that it was a preschool. The Hatsune family's tiniest toolbox was returned to Mai at the end of the school day and she didn't exactly accept it with grace. Instead she had told the teacher that she wanted to leave and find a school that would let her bring her tools. It was the first time she'd heard the term support course, but not the first time that she had wanted to help make heroes stronger and faster. It was a rough day that culminated in a pivotal moment, as difficult days sometimes did. Her dedication to the arts of creation and mending only intensified from that day forward. As one might expect of someone with a single-minded focus on engineering, Mai's mind was almost never idle. The closest it got to idling was probably any time she was on a train. She had a deep appreciation for trains for several reasons. They were fast, which was always nice. They had been some of the first true marvels of engineering and had kept improving for 4 centuries, so there was a rich history to appreciate. On a more practical note, trains took her where she wanted to go. But her most personal connection to trains was the fact that they'd been keeping her little family fed for as long as she could remember. Train journeys had a sort of meditative quality for Mai. On the rare occasions when she wasn't running a sleep debt, she was present during train journeys in a way that she almost never was at home or at school. She listened to the faint hum of the train's electromagnets ghosting over the tracks and the muffled clunking of the mechanical linkages that held the carriages together. She noted the model of every carriage on which she embarked, and, whenever possible, the model of the locomotive that propelled it. On an average day which typically followed an unnecessarily late night, she was tired during her commute. On those occasions she was supremely comfortable just closing her eyes and drifting until she reached her stop. Today was unusual because despite being on a train and despite her being very tired, her mind was racing. Her heart might have been racing a bit too. Her legs ached, but she couldn't help smiling a bit when she focused on the pain. She couldn't protest any bruises that resulted from such an amazing day with Izuku. Right now she was riding the bullet train back to Tohashi to pick up a few changes of clothes and other supplies from home. She told Izuku to go ahead to the school and text her his findings so that they could resume work as soon as possible. She had spent a lot of time thinking about Izuku since she met him. That itself was unusual. She rarely spared much thought for other people. Lately she was devoting just as much thought to Izuku as she was to her babies. It was surprisingly nice. Holding Izuku had been much nicer than just thinking about him. Maybe that was why her heart was racing. She only wished she could have seen him in the dark. He was probably blushing up a storm. She grinned at the thought, disembarking the bullet train and making her way outside. Making Izuku blush was nice, but she also really liked it when he smiled. The very first thing she saw today was Izuku's uncertain little smile. She thought it was cute. He smiled a lot, or he at least seemed to be smiling when she was around. As she waited for the next streetcar outside the station, she reflected on Mamadoria's offer to let her stay with them until the festival. Izuku had appeared to be on board with the idea, but she couldn't help wondering if it was genuine. She'd basically cuddled him last night without asking him. She closed her eyes and sighed as she recalled the feeling. Mai was dimly aware that people found her to be intense in certain ways. Before last night she hadn't done any non-CNSNS cuddling since primary school, but it probably still counted as a faux pas. She did a lot of those, though in recent years she'd learned to avoid the more egregious ones to maintain the illusion of civility. She hoped that she hadn't inspired any fear or disgust in Izuku last night. He was smart and cute and took good care of her instead of trying to call someone else to do it for him. She wanted to work on her babies and eat dinner and sing badly but loudly with him in the future, though she'd have to buy him something to help with his throat if they did that again. She bit her lip and looked uncertainly at her freshly charged phone. Then she took a breath and tried to probe Izuku's actual feelings about Inko's offer without sounding sad. Mech Maiden, so is it really okay to do a sleepover again tonight? If it is, then I promise to do the consent thing before spooning you this time. Yesterday was really fun. Can't wait to figure out WTF we accomplished. Mai reviewed the unsent message bleakly. She was giving him the opportunity to say that he wasn't comfortable with her staying with them, or to just opt out of sleeping together. It was very likely that he would sleep in his own bedroom, especially since his mom would know she was there. Her frown deepened. She wished she could remember how she and Izuku had ended up on the couch and the floor respectively. She couldn't remember anything between K-Truck's sleepy jail and waking up in the middle of the night with a full bladder. As she saw the tram approaching, she sent the message and decided to accept the consequences, whatever they may be. She knew she would be better off getting an answer sooner. If he said no, she could spend less time packing. If she thought about it in practical terms, maybe it would distract her from the clenching, falling sensation that had settled in her chest when she hit the send button. Chapter 7. Checkpoint. While Mai was waiting for Izuku's response, Izuku was finishing his shower. His first thought after he emerged was to check his messages to see if Mai had remembered anything. What he found instead inspired a face-splitting grin. Mai wanted to spoon him again, and she'd thought that yesterday was fun. As far as he was concerned, fun was an understatement. As long as he didn't return to the workshop to find their work utterly unsalvageable, he was ready to call it the best day he'd ever had, followed by the best night. Best days had been happening a lot lately. His life seemed so much better since he'd met Mai. He supposed he'd started at UA too, but Mai dominated his thoughts in a way that his classes didn't. He began composing a reply, conscious of the fact that she might be waiting. Scrollmite, sorry, I was still in the shower. I consent to all past and future spoonings until further notice, though I'm not sure how my mom will feel about it. Yesterday was amazing. Izuku looked at his unsent message and grappled with the question of how to tell Mai that he wanted her to stay with him without telling her just how much he wanted her to. He blushed as he hit upon an idea. Was Mai right about him being a bold guy? Scrollmite, I consent to all past and future spoonings until further notice, though I'm not sure how my mom will feel about it. Yesterday was amazing. You should definitely stay with us again. Maybe I'll make us breakfast tomorrow. What do you like? Mai was grinning like a fool and rereading Izuku's reply for the 7th time when the public address system on the tram informed her that she'd reached her stop. A 5-minute walk brought her to her destination. Many decades ago it was an auto repair shop specializing in electric conversions of old internal combustion vehicles. Her great-grandfather had fought a losing battle for relevance and eventually conceded that there weren't many people left in Japan who loved an old vehicle enough to make it compatible with the modern world. In the end he shuttered the business and found a job at an engineering firm, though he kept his defunct garage and eventually turned it into the Hatsume family home. The Hatsume Motors sign still hung in their entryway as a reminder of his ambition. Mai's father had once delicately explained to her that Hatsumes had historically struggled with the concept of letting go. Mai let herself in through what used to be a side door for staff. The glass storefront had been bricked over and insulated decades ago, and quietly announced that she was home. Izuku wants to make me breakfast, she quietly reported as she passed through the living area with a smile. Beyond the living area was a door that led to the facility's original 2-bay garage. An old Datsun sat against the far wall like the treasured relic it was, immobile but immaculate. It had been taking up space for decades, but there was no thought of letting it go. It was more like a non-ambulatory grandparent than a car at this point. Above the Datsun and the pile of potential donor motors and gearboxes that had slowly grown throughout her childhood was Mai's room. It had once been a storage loft, but she and her father had converted it when she was 9 years old. There was a curtain that she could draw across the edge if she wanted privacy, a ladder which she used most days, and a hydraulic lift for getting large things up and down or getting around when she was sick. The space itself had a bed with an electric blanket, several milk crates full of misplaced tools and miscellaneous parts, a few posters and crudely drawn blueprints from her childhood, roughly 30% of a motorcycle, and a scenic view of the Datsun that set such an unfair standard of beauty for every machine that came after it. Mai climbed up to her room and began gathering a few changes of clothes. There wasn't much variety in Mai's wardrobe, nor did she have one in the literal sense. What she actually had was a rickety coat rack and a dresser whose top was covered in half-forgotten trays of screws and vials of various solvents. She followed her father's example when it came to clothing: find some things you like, buy several copies of each thing, and be done with it. She grabbed a pillowcase and stuffed all of her remaining school uniforms into it, along with underwear, sweatpants, and almost every clean tank top she had. She smiled as she grabbed the one article of clothing that would be far too large for the pillowcase, her jumpsuit. She had technically been issued one by UA, but she was picky about workwear and felt doubtful that she would like the UA one better. She almost grabbed her nightlight but concluded that she'd be better off taking the one from the living room or the kitchen just in case she forgot it at Izuku's place. She slung the pillowcase over one shoulder and the jumpsuit over the other in a token effort to keep any dirt or grime which might have clung to the jumpsuit from soiling the pillowcase or her fresh clothes. As she went to descend the ladder, she realized that she couldn't climb with only one hand and with the legs of the jumpsuit dangling where they might tangle with her actual legs. Impatient, she threw the jumpsuit over the edge toward a less traveled patch of floor and descended the ladder with the edge of the pillowcase held in her teeth. She stopped by the bathroom to grab a toothbrush and deodorant, which it suddenly occurred to her that she should reapply. The same realization led her to change into a fresh tank top, leaving the worn one next to the sink. She'd be back to handle it properly before her dad returned to complain about it. As she passed through the living area, she remembered that she still needed to reply to Izuku. She didn't want to keep him waiting. Waiting had been difficult for her, so maybe it was difficult for him too. She rested her things on the floor and took out her phone. What did she want to eat with him tomorrow morning? It was strange to think that someone besides her dad wanted to spend time with her. She frowned and looked up from her phone. Do you think Izuku is just being nice? Mai addressed the portrait of the pink-haired woman on the butsudan, trying to feel some connection to her. The young woman stared at her departed mother and strained to hear her advice, which was ironic considering how often she ignored the advice of the living. It didn't work. It never had. Mai had finally come to understand at some point that that was okay. She hadn't stopped trying to connect with the memory of her mother, but she had mostly stopped getting upset when she failed. She could get by on her own judgment. That was frequently her only option anyway. I think, even if he's being nice for the right reason. He didn't have to help me with the sports festival, but he wanted to. I think he's just nice. She nodded to herself, smiling softly. He wants to make me breakfast, she murmured once more in wonderment, her cheeks pinkening. She looked at the portrait and wondered if her mother would be happy for her. Please watch over Dad. No big earthquakes while he's gone. Mai requested. Maybe he'll take a break when he gets home, she added, fingering the key to the Thatsun. It sat on the shelf below her mother next to a photo of her paternal grandparents. Someday. She ripped the living room nightlight out of its socket and added it to the pillowcase. Mai was as ready as she could be. On the tram she resolved to respond to Izuku. She'd kept him waiting entirely too long. That didn't mean she actually had an answer to his question. She decided to deflect in order to buy time. It helped that there were genuinely more important things going on. Mech Maiden, I'm not sure what I'd want. Everything your mom made today was good. Did you get back to the workshop yet? Does it look fed? His reply came almost immediately. 𝐒𝐿, almost there. There's a lot going on. It looks like there's a checkpoint set up with a guy issuing hard hats. People are hauling things across campus. There's heavy machinery on the sidewalks. It has to be for the festival. Mai was intrigued. She'd never pass up the opportunity to admire heavy machinery, and the urge to simply watch the preparations was nearly overwhelming. She looked up at the slowly passing businesses and houses and willed the tram to go faster. Only the bullet train would be able to match her sense of urgency. Mech Maiden, take pictures. 𝐒𝐿, the person at the checkpoint made it clear that pictures are not allowed today. I'm worried that we might have limited access to potential testing areas. Mech Maiden, 𝐿 indeed. I feel stupid for not realizing this could happen. It makes sense that they would do a lot of prep work over the weekend to minimize disruptions to regular classes. I'll try to ask around and figure out where we can go after I get back to the workshop. Mai nodded to herself as she read his last message. Izuku seemed to be level-headed in a crisis. Maybe with him on the case she wouldn't have to argue with any teachers or whoever was in charge of the preparations. She was just settling into her seat on the bullet train that would carry her to Musutafu, an N9000 locomotive and the second to newest model carriage, she noted when her phone trilled several times. 𝐒𝐿, I remember now. We're still on track. 𝐒𝐿, picture. Izuku had sent a couple of pictures of the Bay 4 workbench and the patch of floor where Mai had been working, but the true revelation was the picture of the metal printer. That, Mai finally remembered, was the pivotal moment last night. She had discovered that she hadn't left herself enough clearance for the installation of certain components inside the chassis, so she and Izuku quickly cranked out a new design and sent it to the printer. After that they returned to Bay 4 where she practiced assembly of certain components to make the final build go faster while Izuku refined his program and trained the reproposed self-driving model for better threat detection. Mai sent a GIF expressing triumph to Izuku and began scrutinizing the workbench and floor images more closely to ensure that everything was accounted for. For the next 10 minutes she attempted to assemble the dojo in her head from start to finish. She found every piece she needed either in the photos or in her mental catalogue of the workshop's inventory. Just to be on the safe side, she asked Izuku to attempt to fetch some of the items from the workshop. Scrollmite, okay, I've got everything. I also got some answers. Ground beta is off limits, and there are equipment convoys going from there to the stadium at regular intervals that no one is allowed near. Grounds Omega and Gamma are closed so that the people who staff them can help with the festival. I asked about other testing areas and they mentioned the USJ and a bomb range. I guess the support course has a bomb range. Scrollmite, I'm getting the impression that the business and general course upper years are the foot soldiers of the festival prep team. Pretty sure they're the ones at all the checkpoints. I heard Powerloader's name a couple of times on the walk-in, so I think he might be in charge today. That was interesting. Mai hadn't given much thought to which members of the UA staff would have key roles in the sports festival. It made some sense that support course teachers would spearhead the preparations. Mech Maiden, nice scouting. I should be there in less than 30 minutes. She closed her eyes and spent the rest of the ride drifting until her stop, though it seemed that Izuku's shy little smile was now imprinted on the inside of her eyelids. She didn't mind it at all. Just as Izuku had warned, Mai was greeted at the gate by two older students sitting at a folding table which held a tablet computer, several stacks of hard hats, and a few boxes of colorful cloth. The girl who was sitting behind the boxes addressed Mai as she approached. Name: Hatsume Mai. The boy seated at the computer typed her name, then looked to his cohort. And what are you doing today? Academics, festival prep team, or preparing to compete? The girl briskly inquired as she handed Mai a hard hat. Preparing to compete, Mai reported with a grin, fumbling with her pillowcase full of clothes to accept the protective headgear. The boy prodded his screen once and then looked to his partner again. Okay, you'll need to keep the hat on any time you're outdoors today and in any indoor space that requires it. And you need. She reached into one of the boxes. Green. She handed a green bandana with a repeating pattern of a stylized white fist to Mai. If anyone with a yellow bandana tells you to stop or move today, you need to comply for safety reasons. Yellow is the festival prep team, and yellow with silver stripes means they're a prep captain. No photography is allowed today. She quickly examined Mai from head to toe. Can you fly? Nope. Mai replied, just these. She gestured at her eyes. The girl examined Mai's eyes intently. Any vision outside the visible spectrum? Nope. Just optical zoom. Okay then, good luck and be safe. With that she waved Mai through the gate. Mai stopped to put the pillowcase back in her mouth so she could impatiently stuff the bandana partway down the front of her shirt. Behind her she heard the boy speak quietly to his companion. Support course first year. He wondered. Here. The girl commented. Never seen that before. Mai just smiled again around her mouthful of fabric. As she walked through the main building and onto the covered path to the support wing, she observed the activity around her with excitement. The main building had been fairly quiet, but outside she spotted a train of forklifts passing by. They were carrying mystery pallets shrouded in black cellulastic. The train was led by two students on foot with yellow bandanas on their arms. She slowed her pace long enough to see that another pair of students on foot formed the caboose. The support wing itself was also quite lively. Mai heard music, machinery, and laughter spilling out of some of the classrooms. She walked into their homeroom and found it deserted. She assumed that Izuku was in Bay 4 and began making her way there, but as she passed the one third-year classroom that happened to have its door propped open, she saw a familiar face. It would have been more familiar had it not been painted in an even stranger way than it usually was, but there was still no mistaking it. Mai paused for a better look and 𝐭𝐴𝐺 noticed her almost immediately. Hatsume! The older girl cried in pleasant surprise, beckoning her inside. Are you helping with the festival? Did Powerloader tell you that digging is good for the soul? Mai entered the room and took the chance to rest her things on a nearby desk. Doesn't he say that to everyone, though? Like, year-round. Another girl, willowy with bat-like heteromorphic features and presumably 𝐭𝐴𝐺𝐻𝐼's classmate, inquired. My's eyes were drawn to the girl's membranous wings and large, upright fuzzy ears. Knowing that a lot of heteromorphs had to deal with people staring, she forced herself to look back at 𝐭𝐴𝐺𝐻𝐼, which wasn't exactly a bad trade-off as far as interesting sights went. I don't blame him for it, 𝐭𝐴𝐺𝐻𝐼 clarified with a shrug. Her makeup was incredibly unique. She had painted circles cut into alternating quadrants of black and yellow on her cheeks. Digging is his thing, so maybe it's good for his soul. I think he's right. A boy who had been operating a grinder in the corner declared, raising his voice to be heard over the noise of the machine. So you're competing? 𝐭𝐴𝐺𝐻𝐼 declared, gesturing at the younger girl's bandana. My noticed that the other two students wore green as well. What are you making? There was a click and the noise of the grinder quickly dissipated. The boy who'd been using it walked over to 𝐭𝐴𝐺𝐻𝐼 and offered her the object he'd been working on. It appeared to be the head of a shovel. We're making an intelligent dodging 𝐻𝐻𝐼s, a net gun, and a grappling hook. My reported with pride as the older girl carefully fingered the edge of the shovel. Are you and Midoriya a team? She asked excitedly. Yeah. He's programming the dodging 𝐻𝐻𝐼s. He retrained an autonomous driving model for combat. My gushed. He's really good. She added, perhaps unnecessarily. Still, she wanted to make sure that people knew. Ooh, interesting, 𝐭𝐴𝐺𝐻𝐼 declared. And very ambitious, but I think you always are, aren't you? My swelled under the older girl's praise. We've made a technical garment and a few general purpose tools, nothing special. We're not expecting to win, she reported with a shrug and an easy smile. You made the kimono, and the rest of us are just trying to make sure it gets across the finish line with you in it, the bat-like girl argued. The boy who'd made the shovel nodded in agreement. 𝐭𝐴𝐺𝐻𝐼 favored her classmates with a smile. You're all too sweet. She shook her head fondly and returned her attention to my. 𝐒𝐿A released an updated version of that amazing mericarbon stuff that Genist is using, so I decided to make a tactical kimono. She explained briefly, showing my a drawing of the garment. A lot of people try to get into the top 16 in their second year with something they make toward the end of their first, but for third year there's kind of a tradition of just having fun with it. She lightly prodded one of her bicolored stylized dimples. It's also tradition to do the crash test dummy look when you're just competing for fun or supporting someone who's trying to get a combat item into the second round. Like we're just mannequins who were made to test the machinery, you know. Mai understood and thought it was both clever and funny, though she didn't know what to say about it, so she simply nodded. Anyway, I'm practicing the circles. For the real deal I'm going to use a ton of highlights so that I look a bit metallic, and I'll do a Cupid's bow lip with the same pattern as the cheek because of course, but this is the gist of it. She picked up a compact mirror and inspected the circle she'd just finished drawing. I kind of wish I was just a slab of metal so I could crank out a stencil and then do 2 puffs of spray paint, but I'll survive. Mai's phone trilled, returning her attention to the fact Izuku was expecting her. Scrawlmite, is everything okay? I figured you'd be here by now. Is there a line at the gate? I should have asked for a schedule so we could plan around people better. I need to get to Izuku, Mai announced. We still have a lot to do. 𝐭𝐴𝐺𝐻𝐼 grinned when she heard the boy's name. Is that Midoriya? Are you on a first-name basis now? She teased. His mom made me breakfast this morning. Mai replied with a cheeky grin of her own as she picked up her things. 𝐭𝐴𝐺𝐻𝐼's eyebrows, or at least the part of her face she designated as eyebrow territory with pencil, shot up in surprise. Wow, good for you. He seems like a nice guy. Yup. Mai agreed, waving her goodbyes. She had one foot out the door before realizing that she had nearly walked away from some friendly upperclassmen without asking where they should do their testing. Wait. We need a place to test stuff later today. She put the jumpsuit down again to retrieve her phone. He said, USJ or the bomb range? Which one should we use, and where is the bomb range? Start on the bomb range, the boy quickly suggested. 𝐭𝐴𝐺𝐻𝐼 nodded in agreement. It's next to ground gamma. Do stress testing on the bomb range, and then when you're sure it's safe you can bring it all to the USJ and try to find a place to practice," she said. She looked thoughtful for a moment and then frowned. "𝐻𝐻𝐿, a net gun, and a grapple launcher, please let me know when you're ready to start testing. The range captain will probably have too much on his plate to help first-timers. It's the least I can do after the other day." She smiled apologetically and held out her phone so that Mike could scan it for her contact info. Mai thanked her for the information and bade the third years goodbye, finally making her way to Bay 4 and Izuku. "The girl who wears a lot of makeup wants to help us with testing," she informed him as she strode in and deposited her things on the edge of the workbench, scooting some of the neatly arranged components and tools out of the way. "Oh, good, you're here." Izuku visibly sagged with relief. "I was getting worried," he rasped. "So you ran into Ǩēnranzaki?" "Yeah, sorry I took so long. She was telling me about festival stuff." She stepped into his personal bubble to hear him better. "Then I'm glad you talked to her. The less time we spend figuring out how things work, the more time we can spend on the equipment." He smiled as he gestured to the revised chassis. "Are you ready to build this thing, hopefully for the last time?" he whispered. "That depends. Do you have more soulless earworms for me to groove to while I do it? I'll stop playing them when you stop dancing," Izuku assured her with a cheeky grin. Shortly after lunch, Izuku had discovered that the cafeteria was still running and gently persuaded Mai to eat in order to keep her stamina up. Mai messaged Ǩēnranzaki and informed her that their equipment was ready for testing. The net gun actually lacked a net, but they could at least test the ballistics in the meantime. No one had worn the Artful Dodger yet. Izuku insisted that they put a test dummy in it first and Ǩēnranzaki had wholeheartedly agreed. The older girl had asked the boy who had made the shovel, she'd introduced him as Saito, to fetch a vehicle to get them to the bomb range while she took them to the storage area to show them where the test dummies and shock sensors were. Much to Mai's delight, Saito arrived in a K-truck pulling a small trailer. Ǩēnranzaki quickly directed the younger duo to put their equipment and the test dummy into the trailer and then ride alongside it. Apparently this was allowed as long as you kept below a certain speed and did not venture off campus. The ride to the bomb range was surprisingly long, even considering the sedate pace at which Saito was driving. Even disregarding the multiple stops they made at the behest of yellow armbands accompanying forklifts and construction equipment, the trip was a testament to the size of UA's campus. Izuku had known that some of UA's training grounds were the size of small cities, but watching it all go past him was different from simply knowing. Eventually they reached the entrance to Ground Gamma, which was clearly closed. Saito didn't hesitate as he drove right up to the gate and then turned, following the perimeter of the massive industrial complex. They eventually reached a bridge over a canal. On the far side of the bridge they came upon the shortest building Izuku had ever seen. After a few seconds he realized that was because he wasn't seeing most of the building, it was mostly underground. It had to be some kind of observation bunker. About 20 meters from the visible portion of the bunker there was a wall behind which Saito parked. There were a couple of other students with green bandanas behind the wall loading equipment into a K-truck of their own. A short girl with jet black hair peeking from beneath her hard hat waved to them as they piled out of the truck and trailer. She wore a support department jumpsuit and a green bandana. "Hey Saito, Zaki. I thought your stuff was all textile and metal fab this year." Her tone indicated confusion. "Are you already blowing it up for catharsis?" "It's Midoriya and Hatsume's first time on the range, so we're going to help them out," Ǩēnranzaki replied. "Oh, are you the first years?" she inquired excitedly, addressing Mai and Izuku directly. "Suzuki told me he took you two home last night." "Yep," Mai replied. Izuku merely nodded and made a mental note to thank Suzuki since he wasn't sure he'd been coherent enough to do it last night. It was odd to think that it had only been last night. It felt like so much had happened since he'd seen the boy. "He also said you're stronger than you look," the girl teased, nodding in Izuku's direction. Izuku blushed crimson and Mai looked between the two in confusion. "Who's the range captain today?" Ǩēnranzaki asked. "Yoshida, and he's a bit salty about it. I think he wanted to be assigned to the USJ instead. I mean, I guess I don't blame him." Saito allowed. "But the shiny stuff always gets a cushier control room. Shiny stuff gets more grant money, and the USJ is shiny as hell. Yeah, it's probably hard to get politicians excited about a literal hole in the ground, here. 𝐭𝐚𝐲 joked. I'm sure he'll brighten up when he sees me. I have that effect on everyone, right? She smiled cheekily. The dark-haired girl shook her head in amusement. You're crazy. Why do you think I go so HRD on my makeup every day? I want people to know the instant they meet me that I'm insane. She held her head high as she made this declaration, her smile wide and impish. We do. 𝐶𝐬 agreed fondly. Anyway, I think his real beef is that it's cramped and he has to share, the dark-haired girl elaborated. If it's just the four of you it should be fine though. Hopefully we won't be here long. Mai interjected. We just need to make sure our stuff doesn't kill the user or explode. Then we'll go to the USJ. Kill or maim. Izuku rasped, amending Mai's statement. Right. Mai agreed. Well, good luck with that, the girl replied, noticing that her companion had finished tying down the tarp over their equipment and was waiting for her. I hope you place above some of the hero students. She waved goodbye before settling into the driver's seat and departing. As the four unloaded the equipment and walked around the wall, the two upperclassmen made their way toward a raised mound a short distance from the bunker. Mai pointed out the huge net that separated part of the bomb range from the canal, and when they looked back toward the area where 𝐭𝐚𝐲 and 𝐶𝐬 had been heading there was no one there. After a moment of confusion they saw a staircase recessed into the center of the mound and made their way down. From the end of the hallway they heard 𝐭𝐚𝐲's voice. Hey, Yoshida. Have you turned into 𝐭𝐚𝐲 yet? I feel more like that disgusting shark thing that Icelanders used to bury, a deep voice grumbled. 𝐭𝐚𝐲 is actually good. What can I do for you? Mai and Izuku made their way down the hall and into a small room where an absolutely massive boy was seated at a small desk overlooking a giant monitor displaying several surveillance feeds, some of which seemed to be in infrared. Izuku was surprised the boy had even fit through the door. He had to be at least 2.5 meters tall with a broad, muscular build. It seemed likely that he had a mutation quirk of some sort. He was the first person Izuku or Mai had seen today who wore a yellow bandana with silver stripes, a prep captain, though his domain was narrow, both literally and figuratively. Mai did a double take when she noticed that the cloth around his arm was actually two of the prep captain bandanas tied together just to handle the circumference of his bicep. She nudged Izuku and nodded toward the cloth, trusting that he would understand. We need to test a couple of ballistic DLVRY systems and an automated dodging HNS. We brought a dummy but we need a way to string it up. 𝐭𝐚𝐲 replied. Did you bring any truss with you? Yoshida asked with trepidation. Nope. 𝐭𝐚𝐲 reported with a wince. Yoshida closed his eyes and sighed. The storage room is so DMN full. I don't fit. 𝐶𝐬 patted the large boy's shoulder. I got it. I could use a hand putting it together when we get out there though. He said cajolingly. Yeah. Good excuse to go outside. Yoshida nodded. 𝐶𝐬 moved past the cramped observation room and down another hallway while 𝐭𝐚𝐲 shepherded Mai and Izuku back outside, clearing the path for the massive Yoshida to follow. A few minutes later Yoshida was serenely holding a 4-meter stick of truss over his head. It really is lighter than it looks, while Hatsune and 𝐭𝐚𝐲 bolted it onto the two pieces that 𝐶𝐬 had fetched from storage to function as uprights. Some very long bolts had secured the upright truss sections to a small concrete pad a short distance from the bunker. Izuku had been ready to help, but 𝐶𝐬 had pointed out that the girls were wearing better shoes for the job of climbing the uprights. Apparently Mai's boots were steel-toed in spite of their svelte appearance, and 𝐭𝐚𝐲's more garish boots were rigid enough to make her an obvious choice for the job as well. Izuku was still wearing his red sneakers. He felt a new sense of urgency regarding the search for quirkless-compatible steel toes. He knew that the school had a curated list of discounted boots that he could order, but he hadn't been ready to face the possibility that none of the boots would be compatible with his body. Now he couldn't put it off anymore. If there wasn't a model for him on UA's list, then he'd just have to swallow his pride and ask his mom to pay full price for something else. He resolved to peruse the list the next time he had a moment alone. Once the girls were finished building their very modern gallows, Yoshida tied the dummy to the center of the truss by a cleat recessed into the top of its head. As soon as this was done, 𝐭𝐚𝐲 cozied up to the dummy and took a selfie, taking care to pose so that the black and yellow circles were visible on both hers and the dummy's cheeks. "Thank you, 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲." She batted her prodigious lashes at the dummy and flirtatiously placed a hand on its chest. "It's always such a pleasure working with you, Miss Fortune Taro." Mai snickered quietly. "That's great. I think this one is her favorite." Saito remarked quietly. "I recognize the char on its face from that fireproofing test in our first year." 𝐭𝐚𝐲 then placed a wet, smacking kiss on the dummy's cheek, patted it on the head, and turned to face the amused onlookers. "Okay, he's got his good luck charm and he's ready for his briefing. I see you've escalated from chewing the scenery to kissing it, Zaki." Saito teased. Mai and Izuku grabbed the 𝐻𝐻𝐻 and began to strap it onto 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲. Soon the artful dodger was ready for its maiden journey. "Well, that was grim," Saito remarked as they watched the footage from the high-speed camera again. 𝐭𝐚𝐲 was poring over the data from the shock sensors with a frown while Izuku perused the manual for the actuators. "That was supposed to be the outer limit of the machine, right?" she wondered aloud. "How bad was it?" Mai asked with trepidation. "Well, if 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲 survives the shock to his organs, which is iffy, he's definitely not going to be walking again. We broke his spine. His legs came off," Saito cried, gesturing violently at the screen. "They are designed to come off." 𝐭𝐚𝐲 gently squeezed his shoulder in an effort to comfort him. After seeing the older girl give the dummy a kiss for luck, Mai thought it strange that she wasn't the one most disturbed by 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲's mortal injuries. "Got the power curve wrong," Izuku rasped without looking up from his laptop. "My mistake." He was already adjusting his code. Really, it wasn't his mistake, there simply wasn't any documentation for the type of work he needed the machine to do. The components Mai was using were designed for torque, not power. They were still quite powerful, but in retrospect the control library he'd found was probably written with torque in mind. Yoshida just rested his head against the wall and tried to pretend that he was somewhere else. "Okay, are you ready?" 𝐭𝐚𝐲 inquired with a nervous smile as she adjusted Mai's hard hat. The girl nodded slightly, mindful of her senpai's hands. After a few tweaks to the firmware and several successful tests, they had disassembled the truss gallows and laid the hastily reconstructed 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲 to rest in the tiny trailer. They then lashed every available object that might provide cushioning to Mai's extremities and her rear. She had changed into her jumpsuit before they'd left the support wing, so there was no worry about dirtying her clothes, not that Izuku was the least bit worried about clothes at the moment. He was completely focused on ensuring that Mai didn't get hurt. "Starting small," he whispered to her. "Limited to less than a meter." Izuku triple-checked the limits he'd set in the program. Any value that was destined to be sent to the actuators was checked and rejected if it exceeded the value which should correspond to sending Mai's mass plus the 𝐻𝐻𝐻 no more than 80 centimeters skyward. After sending 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲 on the same short hop several times and deriving the difference between the dummy's weight and Mai's, Izuku was as satisfied as he could be. He flashed the new firmware to the dodger one last time just in case he'd missed a step. Mai smiled rakishly at him as he unplugged from the data port on the dodger and stood up. Izuku gave his partner a shy smile and a thumbs up and retreated to admire her from a safe distance. She was so brave. So incredible in so many ways. They had found some ball of various sizes and densities in the storage room, and Izuku had suggested that the ball be the attack in the first tests. Saito had been elected to throw the ball, an inflatable RBB-1 that would have been used for dodgeball, because of his Little League experience. After receiving a final nod from both Izuku and Mai, he wound up and threw the ball at Mai's midsection. Mai tensed, and with a loud crack she found herself jerked out of the ball's path and sailing sideways. The ball continued right through the space she'd occupied only a second ago. She tripped the instant she touched down, inexpertly rolling with her momentum and ending up on her hands and knees. She looked up at Izuku with unbridled joy. "That mostly worked," she cried triumphantly. Saito and 𝐭𝐚𝐲 visibly sagged with relief while Izuku rushed to Mai's side to help her up. "Now I just need to learn how to land. This is giving me ideas for a variably textured outsole. If I could change the friction in midair to determine how much I slide, that could be a game changer." They'd probably have to be platforms, though. She muttered. There's no time. She shook the thought away. Returning to the matter at hand, she smiled giddily at Izuku. This is really going to work, she said breathlessly, quivering with excitement. Grabbing his laptop again, Izuku changed the hard limit in the program to 1.5 meters and plugged back into the dojo. He favored Mai with a radiant smile as he waited for the new firmware to finish loading. Mai's heart had already been revved up from adrenaline and exertion, but she was pretty sure it completely skipped a gear when Izuku looked up at her, close enough that she could smell his shampoo, and whispered, "Going to be amazing." He said it with such conviction and affection that she couldn't help but believe him. For the next hour Mai got accustomed to being jerked to and fro by her creation while Izuku gradually raised the operational ceiling of the dojo to 2 meters. Eventually Saito's arm was tired and Mai was satisfied enough with her landings that she asked Izuku if they could begin practicing intentional jumps. "I guess it's electrode time again, here." Mai asked Izuku with a mischievous grin. "Do you want some help getting them on?" Ken offered. "Well." Mai drew the word out while staring at Izuku, waiting for his inevitable blush to fully form. "Normally I outsource all my KNKY electrode application to Izuku, but I think we're bonding, so sure." The two girls walked off toward the observation bunker, Kenranzaki tossing a theatrically scandalized look over her shoulder toward the boys. Saito chuckled quietly at the retreating girls. "Hatsune seems like fun," he said, and while Izuku detected no innuendo in the remark he still felt the need to clear the air. "She is," the younger boy rasped. "But she's kidding about the KNKY stuff. I think she just likes to make me blush." Izuku rubbed the back of his neck nervously. "I think you're right." Saito agreed with a smile. They noticed Yoshida awkwardly make his way to the surface where he stretched and then resumed the task of looking awkward while waiting for the girls to finish. "So what's the plan for controlling manual jumps? I don't remember seeing an EEG halo or anything." Izuku shook his head. "Reacting to muscle movement." Saito hummed in understanding. "So how are you filtering noise from those muscle groups?" he wondered aloud. "Wouldn't muscle activity for a jump and something like a deadlift look really similar from the waist down?" Izuku blinked in alarm while he processed Saito's observation. Then he wheezed out a curse, closed his eyes, and tilted his head skyward as though inviting some higher power to put him out of his misery. He took a few deep breaths and opened his eyes to stare listlessly at nothing. "I guess we need intent after all," he whispered dejectedly. Mai and Kenranzaki were consulting the map of electrode locations Izuku had drawn when Mai's phone trilled. She retrieved it to find a message from Izuku. "Scrollmite, I am a fool. Muscle activity alone could give us dangerous false positives. We can't just respond to muscle movement. We'll probably get more predictable jumps if we can gather EEG data of you jumping at various vectors. I know I said the brain interfaces that heroes use are hard to learn, but if we just listen to your legs we'll never hear them ask for a height above your unaugmented maximum. I was planning on scaling that input onto the machine's operational ceiling, but this will be better. Saito is taking me to pick up EEG equipment. Feel free to keep practicing while I'm gone. I'm sorry I didn't get it right the first time." "Was that Midoriya?" the older girl asked. "What did he say?" Mai showed her the message. "Nobody gets it right the first time, not something this complex," she scoffed. "He's too HRD on himself." She shook her head. "Oh." She drew the word out teasingly. "He just really cares what you think about him, doesn't want you to think he's not smart enough for you." Mai furrowed her brow in confusion. "Izuku's smarter than me, though." She protested, then paused because she wasn't sure she'd ever said that about someone before. "Well, I don't think it has to be a contest," Kenranzaki argued, "but you could tell him he's definitely smart enough to be your partner." "I think I told him," Mai said doubtfully. She tried to remember. She'd called him smart because, right, he was worried UA wouldn't keep him. "Maybe you could tell him again so he won't worry," Kenranzaki suggested with a gentle smile. "It's harder to work when you're worried, and he'd feel better knowing you're not upset." Mai hummed pensively at this. After a moment of consideration she responded. "Mech Maiden, it's okay. Nothing is perfect the first time. I know you're smart enough to get it working. Meanwhile, Saito and Izuku were driving as quickly as the rules allowed in the direction of the support wing. Seeing Mai's response, Izuku smiled widely. If Saito noticed the glow about the younger boy out of the corner of his eye, he made no comment, at least not in the moment. He might ask Zaki about the timing later. Izuku's smile eventually faded as he considered the trajectory of his and Mai's day. We still need to test the guns, but we need EEG data for big jumps. True. Saito agreed. But we meant to get to the USJ today. Izuku hissed plaintively, clutching his head as Saito looked on in concern. You could have them test the grapple now to make sure it's safe, then bring it to the USJ for target practice. See if she can jump and shoot at the same time. Izuku looked startled and intrigued by the suggestion. Yeah, maybe, he whispered excitedly, beginning to compose another message. Izuku is asking if we can test the grapple launcher now so that we can go to the USJ for jumping and target practice. Mai reported. They were about halfway done with the electrodes. 𝐭𝐸𝐺 hummed in contemplation. Testing space is going to be at a real premium there. Last year there was plenty of sparring going on outside, but I'm not sure you're ready for sparring. Have you had any martial arts training at all? Nope. Mai said cheekily. I wasn't planning on getting hit, she reported with a shrug. Or fighting fair, she added under her breath. Well, I definitely don't recommend fighting fair in the festival, the older girl said with a laugh. I say the best way to win is to do something unexpected, especially when you're up against stronger opponents. Mai looked thoughtful for a moment. I wish I hadn't designed it mostly for lateral movement. If I hadn't, then maybe I could tackle people if I run out of nets. I don't think people would expect that. You don't strike me as a tackler, and you've usually got to follow tackling up with grappling. That's another game I can't picture either of us winning. Mai hummed non-committally as she reread Izuku's message. I'll leave the grappling to the grapple gun. Let's make sure it doesn't explode. I'll grab some chalk and draw a target on the wall. 𝐭𝐸𝐺 offered. We probably need a stick and some string, too. Mai mused. Should we sit in the bunker for the first few shots? Yes. 𝐭𝐸𝐺 declared with an emphatic nod. Maybe a vice instead of a stick, too. If there was one thing Izuku hated, it was having to make a choice on short notice. Before him sat two different models of EEG Halo from two different companies. Saito assured him that they were very, very similar. It was a trap, really. If you wanted to kill an engineer, you just had to give them two nearly equivalent options to research and wait for them to starve. If you wanted to kill a software developer, you could usually set the same trap, though the process was slower. The starvation typically didn't happen until they'd coded about half of an alternative to the two existing choices and then failed to find any investors. Thankfully, Izuku was self-aware enough to recognize the danger. He tried to crush the urge to dive headfirst down the rabbit hole by appealing to the experience of someone he trusted. Have you worked with either one before? He whispered to Saito. No, but someone in my class worked with that one. He pointed to the one with the blue logo. What for? Fly-by-wire for someone with a quirk that they were trying to adapt for propulsion. Any problems? Saito frowned thoughtfully. They said the way the virtual appendage function was designed was kind of getting in the way. They found a workaround though. Izuku grabbed it. It would probably be good enough, and the clock was ticking. He really hoped it would be good enough. As they rigged their slapdash remote firing mechanism, 𝐭𝐸𝐺 allowed her curiosity to get the best of her. So you slept at Midoriya's house last night? Yup. Mai replied with a smile, applying more tape. It's kind of hard to imagine him offering, he seems a bit shy. But you did say you outsource your KNKY stuff to him, I guess. She muttered, suddenly embarrassed. Did you two know each other before UA? Nope. Mai said with amusement, though her hands soon faltered as she reflected on the strange notion that Izuku had been part of her life for less than a week. She tested the idea of going home to the empty Hatsune house and sleeping on her lofty perch and was shocked at how little it appealed to her. It was astonishing how quickly an old couch at her back and a boy held snugly against her chest had come to feel like, what, exactly? Table stakes. An axiom. Home, somehow. It had only been one night, but whenever her mind was quiet enough to recall it, she desperately wanted to repeat it. "I'm actually going back tonight," she said nonchalantly. His mom offered. "Until the festival." 𝐭𝐴𝐻𝐿 looked surprised. "I live in Toyohashi and I missed the train," she elaborated. "Ah." The older girl nodded. "Sounds like a nice family." His mom made pancakes. Mai recalled, then looked extremely worried. "I think I forgot her name." 𝐒𝐭𝐴𝐻𝐿 gently relieved the distracted girl of the roll of tape and continued building their questionable brace. "I bet it'll come to you." Mai stared unseeingly at the ground. "Pretty sure it was 2 syllables." She muttered. Izuku had tried to start reading the documentation for the Halo as they drove back to the bomb range, but he'd gotten surprisingly car-sick for his efforts. He spent plenty of time reading on commuter trains, so it hadn't even occurred to him to worry about it. He hummed pitifully as he rested his head against the window, eyes closed to keep the lurching of the world at bay. "If you think you're gonna lose it, please try to get the window down first," Saito gently requested. Izuku groaned with renewed intensity at the thought. "How did the grapple gun test go?" Saito inquired as he approached the girls. Both girls pointed at a mark on the wall that was just at the edge of the bullseye they'd drawn. "Where's Izuku?" Mai inquired as soon as she realized Saito was alone. "He's catching his breath. He got car-sick trying to read the manual for the Halo." Mai looked disturbed. "Is he okay?" "I think he just needs a couple minutes on solid ground and he'll be fine," Saito assured her, then brandished the Halo. "He said we could go ahead and get this hooked up." 𝐭𝐴𝐻𝐿 took the Halo from Saito and took a step toward Mai, then paused and gave the younger girl an appraising look. "We need to do something with your hair." Mai looked concerned. "Not right this minute, for the festival. You need your hair out of the way while you're running or fighting. Most people do French braids if they've got as much as you. Don't know how to do that one." Mai replied quietly, and though it wasn't the sort of thing that she put much stock in, she found herself wishing that she could have given a different answer. If she couldn't braid hair, then what else might people assume she couldn't do? "I'll do it for you the day of the event, or I'm sure there will be other people offering. I've heard that a braid train usually forms in the holding area for the first event. I guess you'd be the locomotive," 𝐭𝐴𝐻𝐿 declared with a warm smile. "That is the best part of the train." Mai agreed. "You'll look great. Not as stylish as me with the merimono, but definitely more stylish than Saito," she said teasingly. "Hurtful," Saito said flatly. "Ah, but the more you and the others fade into the background, the brighter I shine. Isn't that the point?" 𝐭𝐴𝐻𝐿 mused impishly. "Am I really not stylish?" Saito inquired plaintively. "You own cargo shorts. We've been over this," 𝐭𝐴𝐻𝐿 said dismissively as she went behind Mai to adjust the fit of the Halo. "I have some cargo shorts," Mai reported in bemusement. "What's wrong with cargo shorts?" Saito gestured forcefully at Mai to underscore her question. "What if it's hot and you need to carry things?" Saito gestured even more wildly, clearly indicating that she had made his point. Cargo is more dramatic when people don't see it coming. 𝐭𝐴𝐻𝐿 finished her adjustments and stepped back in front of Mai. "Watch me at the festival." She looked the younger girl straight in the eyes with a predatory grin. "You'll see." "Okay," Mai agreed. She was definitely interested in what sort of tricks the older girl might literally have up her sleeve during the competition, but that interest was overshadowed by concern for her partner who had not yet reappeared. "I'm gonna check on Izuku." Leaving the upperclassmen behind, she made her way around the wall behind the bunker to find him in the passenger seat with his eyes closed. He had the door open, presumably to let the fresh air wash over him. Mai considered calling out to him but decided at the last moment to approach quietly. Loud noises were never helpful when she felt sick. "Izuku," she prompted him softly. He didn't react. Izuku was asleep and Mai was conflicted. On the one hand, there was still so much to do. On the other hand, they had already done so much. The last 24 hours had been a whirlwind, even by her standards. Even if he'd fallen asleep on purpose, and she doubted he had, it's not as though he could be blamed for it. She grabbed the manual off of his lap and quietly leafed through it. 𝐭𝐚𝐲 and 𝐒𝐭 were engaged in quiet discussion when 𝐻𝐸𝐽 reappeared, San's partner. Instantly they were concerned. "Is he okay?" 𝐒𝐭 asked apprehensively. "I think he fell asleep and I'm not sure I should wake him up. We had a really late night." Mai explained. "The Halo has internal recording, so we can set that up and dash." She stopped. "We need him to send manual jump commands, don't we?" She frowned. There just wasn't enough time. She could have taken weeks to do the things she'd accomplished in the last 2 days, but UA just had to have its festival so early that the first years couldn't make a good showing. What was that about? And why were her legs aching? She let out a low groan of frustration. Her stupid legs were sore because she'd done more exercise in the last 2 days than she had in the last 2 months, of course. "My legs hurt and I'm kinda hungry and there's not enough time," she sighed. "I've got painkillers in my bag." 𝐭𝐚𝐲 volunteered, nodding toward the wall and the truck. "I can try not to wake him up." "Thank you." Mai mumbled, lying down and staring at the sky. "I know it's an insane deadline, but you're actually doing really well." 𝐒𝐭 assured the supine girl. "If you keep going, I think you can still be the only person to bring equipment from the first-year support classes. Even if you don't get manual jumps working, I think you could find ways to use that thing. Everybody runs out of steam sometime. You shouldn't be too HRD on yourselves." Izuku was being too HRD on himself. Mai observed. 𝐭𝐚𝐲 said so. "I bet he really wants you to do well." 𝐒𝐭 shrugged. "And if he is beating himself up too much, you can tell him to stop." "You think he'd listen?" Mai asked doubtfully. 𝐒𝐭 opened his mouth to answer but paused. After a moment of contemplation he responded. "I think it depends on how you tell him." Izuku woke up to the distant sound of a small electric motor. No, 2 motors. Blinking at the surprising amount of light, he wasn't accustomed to waking up outside. He noticed a familiar face through the windshield. 𝐭𝐚𝐲 was striding toward him. He couldn't remember what was going on. He examined the scenery. The gate was familiar. Ground Gamma. There were some vending machines under a little awning next to the gate. That seemed to be the point from which 𝐭𝐚𝐲 was returning. Perhaps he'd heard the machines dispensing something. "Hey, you're up," the older girl observed. "Here, I got you some coffee. It's the wimpy stuff, so even if you don't like coffee you should be able to choke it down." She handed him a can. He struggled to take it for a moment. It seemed that his fingers weren't awake yet. "I also got 𝐻𝐸𝐽 some fruit leather and nuts to hold her over until dinner. I bet she'd share with you though." She teased, resting a couple cans of water on her seat and dumping the rest of the snack pile onto Izuku. He wasn't awake enough to blush, so he just smiled serenely and attempted to open the heavily attenuated coffee. "I talked to 𝐒𝐭 and he said he was pretty sure the manual jump setup would be quick." "Is that right?" she inquired as she reclaimed the driver's seat, resting the cans between her legs since UA had not sprung for the optional cup holders. "Yeah." Izuku agreed, his mind slowly spooling up again. "It's quick." "So, set up the manual jump control and then hit the USJ," she suggested. "Yeah," he said with determination as she turned the little truck around and drove the way they'd come. He had a job to do. He could rest tonight. It suddenly occurred to him to wonder how exactly that rest would be happening. They had both mentioned future spooning. He flushed as he recalled being hauled onto the couch and then waking up in Mai's arms. Would things be different tonight, assuming they had their collective wits about them? With its organic shape and teeming horde of students, the USJ reminded Izuku of an anthill. People were coming and going, impatiently waiting, or enthusiastically greeting friends all around him. Apparently there was a temporary bus route running there from the main building at regular intervals. A load of 7 or 8 people of varying ages with green armbands had just disembarked from one such bus as 𝐒𝐭 parked the truck outside the facility next to a few others. 𝐭𝐚𝐲 and 𝐒𝐭 led the group to the bottom of the steps where they found another folding table manned by another student with a yellow bandana. "The USJ is only open to those with festival business today. Are all of you here to train?" "No, just 𝐻𝐸𝐽. We're testing 𝐻𝐸𝐽's equipment." "𝐻𝐸𝐽?" the girl muttered as she typed. "𝐻𝐸𝐽 Mai, Class 1H, here. That's a new one." "Yup." Mai replied. "Haven't seen any other support first years yet." I'm guessing you'd like to avoid areas with other first years if possible. Yes. Izuku whispered to Mai before she could really think about it. Yes. She relayed his message. Okay, you've got some options. I'm assuming you'd like solid ground that isn't on fire to practice on. Mai seemed taken aback by the question. Her eyes flicked to the ground and stayed there as she answered. I should practice on both. She mumbled. Izuku nodded in agreement. Okay, right now I've got no first years in the downpour or landslide zones. You can find little patches of solid ground in the landslide. You might have to ask some upperclassmen to share. Or you can practice on the grid out here. She gestured to a massive grid painted on the ground next to the facility where students were sparring or testing equipment. If you're out here, then dozens of people can see you, and some of them will be competition. Saito warned. Support gear like yours will draw a lot of eyes. I don't think sparring is even a good idea yet, so let's talk about zones. Where do we go? Ǩēnranzaki asked Saito. Saito rubbed his chin. I'm thinking downpour. Landslide is too steep and uneven to be meaningful practice for the third round, and there's not much time left in the day. Plus, if she falls in the landslide, she might keep falling for a while. Ǩēnranzaki considered the sky for a second. This late in the day, the landslide should be pretty stable, unless there was a reset at lunchtime. She inquired, but the girl managing the entrance shook her head. Right. Though I guess it still might be too steep for big jumps. Had Izuku not been entirely focused on making sure he was heard by the third years, he might have noticed that Mai's eyes had become unfocused. He cleared his throat. She has to get through the first round. First round always has terrain. He rasped. Let's go to the landslide zone. Mai decided, heeding his advice. I need to learn to use the dodger for more than just dodging. Izuku was surprised at the grim determination on Mai's face. As Ǩēnranzaki had predicted, space was a hot commodity inside the USJ. This was especially evident in the central plaza, which they were now passing through on their way to the landslide zone. Izuku saw a few people sparring in pairs or groups, but they were vastly outnumbered by people waiting their turn to spar in the limited open space. Several of them were casting longing or withering looks at the fountain in the center. It was taking up a lot of real estate. As they passed closer to the fountain and Izuku was able to see the far side of it, he was surprised to find that there was some plastic patio furniture and a boy sitting in the water. The boy wore a stopwatch, wading boots, and a yellow bandana. Apparently his watery post was part of the prep team's strategy to maximize the functional square footage of the plaza. People gathered around the edge of the fountain to lobby for their right to use the space, while the boy sloshed his way from person to person to hear them out. Soon they arrived at the landslide zone. They were greeted by a scale-covered, lizard-like girl. They were wearing the feminine uniform, anyway, who confirmed Mai's name and directed them to climb to a certain area. After the girl had finished her explanation, Ǩēnranzaki asked how stable the suggested area was. Should be about as stable as it gets at this point. The scaly student replied. We had a guy in here before lunch whose quirk makes sonic booms sometimes. He was working on his aim. Mai took a deep breath and exhaled, smiling in secret relief at the news. Cool, you can really let loose then, here. Ǩēnranzaki nudged Mai excitedly. Carefully. Izuku cautioned quietly. Bigger jumps, not crazy ones. Saito had turned to stare across the facility at the shipwreck zone. Actually, I might have an idea about that. She's gonna puncture it. Ǩēnranzaki stated flatly. If I puncture it, would I have to replace it? How much do these things cost? Mai inquired. Izuku was busy setting up EEG recording and preparing the program for manual jumps. They said they go through about 3 rafts per year on average. Saito reported. So it's probably fine if we destroy one. And I think she'll only puncture it if she misses. Otherwise the pistons will just straddle it, right? He said encouragingly, looking to Izuku for confirmation. Izuku was too engrossed in his work to notice. The group was standing on the remains of a building which lay about 70 degrees from its original upright position. After asking around to ensure that it wouldn't be missed, Saito had retrieved an inflatable raft from the shipwreck zone. For the sake of convenience, he'd chosen the self-inflating type, though they hadn't inflated it yet. Mai had begged to be the one to pull the cord and no one was going to protest. They'd set the raft in some dirt about 5 meters from the place where the building met the freshly churned land. "Ooh! I should stand on it while it inflates," Mai exclaimed. "How bad would that be?" "I don't think you can pull the cord if you're standing on top of it," 𝐭𝐚𝐲 pointed out. Mai's brow furrowed for a split second, then she emphatically declared that it would be worth the trade-off. Saito tilted his head and looked at the raft appraisingly. "I kind of want to see that," he admitted. "Midoriya, what would the Dojo do if 𝐻ATSUM was thrown up in the air by something?" 𝐭𝐚𝐲 asked. "It should slow her down," he rasped. "As long as she's upright and not spinning." Mai grinned. Izuku flushed and averted his eyes from the sheer mischief in that grin. "Little test jumps first. Haven't tried uneven ground yet." He gestured to the recumbent building under their feet. Saito retrieved the ball they'd brought along and threw it at Mai. It had barely left his hand when he realized his mistake. The Dojo worked just fine, accounting for the uneven terrain before it sent Mai sailing slightly uphill and out of the ball's path, then bringing Mai in for a landing that was only a bit more dramatic than usual. The problem was that the ball was now bouncing toward the plaza and picking up speed. Saito rushed to the nearest outcropping in panic, and was about to shout a warning to the people in the plaza before he saw the massive retaining wall that they'd passed on the way up. Given that the area was specifically designed to simulate landslides, it made perfect sense that there would be a barrier to catch falling debris. "You forgot about the wall," 𝐭𝐚𝐲 said matter-of-factly as she walked up next to him with a knowing smile. "Yes." The word escaped Saito as a sigh of relief. Disaster averted. 𝐭𝐚𝐲 patted her classmate on the back. He only felt slightly patronized. "Let's blow up the raft," Mai exclaimed, clenching her fists in excitement. "More tests." Izuku countered quietly. Mai didn't protest. Eventually, after much coaching and one aborted attempt at meditation on Mai's part, Izuku was able to give Mai some rudimentary mental jump controls. After a few quick tests to ensure that the behavior was predictable, he felt she'd earned a reward. He'd been taking videos with his phone so that he could cross-reference the EEG readings with actual movement later, but the video of Mai launching herself using the explosive force of the raft's inflation was like visual poetry. She was propelled upward with a satisfying thwomp and managed to stick the landing with the Dojo's help. The video also included her frantic celebration and joyous laughter afterward. Mai sent the video to her father with absolutely no context. He told her that the Dojo was impressive and to stop screwing around. He also said that he missed her and told her to eat a vegetable. "Wow, 𝐻ATSUM, are you sure you don't belong in the hero course?" 𝐭𝐚𝐲 patted the younger girl on the back. "Snipe's gotta retire eventually." "I'm not that good," Mai argued, though the various makeshift targets they'd been using begged to differ. Various trees and chunks of misplaced office building had been deemed suspicious and thoroughly grappled by Mai's grappling gun. She'd managed to land 3 direct hits in a row with the launcher, and one of those was in mid-air shortly after she'd left the ground. The pink-haired girl's accuracy surprised everyone. She'd even managed to land on the upturned raft more than once, proving that she was able to direct the Dojo reliably. "Do you play a lot of games?" Saito inquired suspiciously. "I used to. I got banned from multiplayer for modding my wand though," Mai reported with a shrug. "A hair," Saito said flatly. "The ergonomics and weight distribution on the stock wand were CRP." Mai protested vehemently. "And if I can figure out a better firing mechanism than the fuckwits who designed the thing, then haven't I earned the advantage?" she mused petulantly. Izuku just smiled. "If that net gun ends up working right, you're going to be an absolute terror with it," Saito declared. 𝐭𝐚𝐲 and Saito's last act before leaving the younger partners for the evening was to arrange a quick spar in the downpour zone with someone in the third-year hero course. With a small tarp wrapped hastily over the top of the Dojo, Mai had to rely on her own instincts as the driving rain soaked her to the skin and blunted the Dojo's vision. To keep things realistic, she hadn't been told what the older boy's quirk was. All she'd been told was that his name was Mori and he was going to have his pick of sidekick jobs at prestigious agencies as soon as he graduated. Izuku was trying to figure out Mori's quirk during the fight, but he didn't have much to work with. The boy had no obvious heteromorphic features and didn't seem to emit anything. He didn't show any signs of superhuman strength. He kept the pressure on Mai, allowing her less and less time to think as they went on. Mai was mostly able to use the dodger to avoid being hit, though he did sometimes manage to corner her against buildings or trees. When he saw the panic in Mai's movements in those tense moments or realized that she wasn't aware of an obstacle behind her, he would slow his assault and warn her that she couldn't jump safely. He would even point out the hazards so that she could take note of them. Then he would cede some ground so that they could continue. A couple of times when Mai allowed herself to be cornered, he announced that he was going to hit her, preemptively urging her to fight through the pain. He was even so courteous as to mention where he would be hitting her. The frightening thing was that he was right both times. He punched her once in the gut and lightly cuffed her once on the ear. Izuku made a valiant effort to appreciate the private tutelage instead of abhorring the violence against Mai. He felt quite mature for only hating the hero student a little bit. Mai rated the experience of being punched as a 3 out of 10 and thanked the older boy for his time. You really weren't bad. If your net gun ends up working, I think you'll do well against non-ranged first years in the last round. The boy informed her after bowing respectfully. Were you even using your quirk? Mai inquired plaintively, attempting to bow but aborting the gesture when her abdominal muscles twinged. A little, he said modestly. Are you going to tell me what it is? She asked dubiously. What do you think it is? He asked with a cryptic smile. I think I'll ask Izuku. Mai said flatly. They caught one of the buses from the USJ back to the support wing. It was a bit tense not knowing whether any of the people around them were first years, so they spoke quietly, not that Izuku had any other option. I think I've got to stop by the classroom and change. Mai mused after they'd sat down. I'd look like an, but if I tried to ride the train like this. So do you just have your own jumpsuit? Izuku inquired. The one she'd brought from home and changed into that morning looked different from the one still in its packaging in his desk. Do you not? Mai demanded incredulously. Not until UA gave me one. Izuku whispered with a shrug. Mai scared her teeth. I don't know what kind of peasant doesn't have their own jumpsuit. She eyed him with exaggerated distrust. Izuku rolled his eyes fondly. You going to take me shopping? He joked, and Mai suddenly smiled in a way that suggested that she absolutely would. After the festival, she said decisively, grinning toothily at him. The journey back to the support wing didn't take long. Once they arrived, Mai changed out of her dirty jumpsuit and hastily wiped some of the sweat and grime from her skin in the bathroom. Izuku had very thoroughly averted his eyes when Mai asked him to pass some shop towels through the door. With that done, they set off for the Midoriya home. They noticed that the gate guards had changed, but more interestingly they noticed students in white bandanas for the first time that day near the gate. Based on the equipment they were carrying, they seemed to be a camera crew. Fresh green. The one holding the camera wondered aloud. I don't remember seeing them yet, replied the girl holding the microphone. Hi. I see you're competing in the festival. She waved at the duo. Do you mind giving a quick interview? We're from the business course. Izuku looked questioningly at Mai, who looked uncertain herself at first. Then she squared her shoulders and smiled at the white-clad group. Sure. I don't suppose you've interviewed any first-year support course competitors? She slyly inquired. Ooh, she's got rarity value, the girl who seemed to be the actual interviewer purred. I haven't. So before we start, our footage and the contents of the interview will be under embargo until your last event is over, so you don't have to worry about giving away any advantages. Can you tell us your name and your quirk? I'm Hatsune Mai and this is Midoriya Izuku. She pulled Izuku into the frame. And I'm not competing with my quirk. I'm competing with support equipment that we made. She reported with a grin. Izuku looked and felt like a deer in the headlights. It was an especially apt comparison since the rest of the camera crew were actually flanking them with bright studio lights. He had just enough presence of mind to be grateful that they probably wouldn't ask him about his quirk since he wasn't actually competing. Oh. I didn't realize that the self-made equipment allowance applied to first years. But doesn't that mean you've only had a week to prepare? The girl inquired, clearly intrigued. Yep. Mai said brightly. Interesting, the girl exclaimed. Why did you decide to compete? Mai opened her mouth to speak and suddenly seemed to completely lose her momentum. She began, then stopped, her eyebrows knitting together in an expression that Izuku couldn't identify. Watching Mai freeze up inspired Izuku to dip into his emergency supply of courage. He leaned in closer to ensure that she would hear him. "Represent support," he whispered. "Tell heroes you'll keep them safe." "Thanks, Izuku," Mai said softly, smiling gratefully at her partner before turning back to the camera. "I'm going to represent the support department, and I'm going to tell UA and the world that Hatsune and Midoriya can make heroes stronger and faster." Mai expected that anyone who watched the interview would attribute her nervous smile at that moment to excitement, but if she was honest, it was mostly a result of Izuku practically whispering in her ear. The remainder of the interview consisted of a couple of questions about the nature of their equipment, surprise on the interviewer's part that they had created more than one item, coyness on Mai's part about specific functionality, and a quick explanation of Izuku's near-muteness, which ensured that Izuku's blush was captured in extremely high fidelity for a potentially global audience. After the interview, Izuku expressed surprise that Mai had held back on her descriptions of the equipment. "Oh, I don't want to look like an idiot if we don't get everything working. Under-promise, over-deliver, always," she said sagely. "I guess I should be thinking more about what I want to say, though. I was picturing a speech if I get into the last round." Mai commented as they finally made their way through the gate. Izuku furrowed his brow as he attempted to figure out what Mai meant by that. When was she picturing this speech taking place? After the award ceremony, he inquired. As far as he knew, that wasn't something that normally happened. Mai looked at him in mild surprise. "No, during the fight. Unless it's a terrible matchup and I get my butt kicked instantly, I want to do a little sales pitch for our babies too, but it's mostly going to be, she trailed off. "Do I need to write a manifesto?" She wondered aloud, seemingly awed that that idea had occurred to her but powerless to deny its relevance. "That feels like a thought that only crazy people have," she said doubtfully. Izuku nodded distractedly. She wanted to speak to the audience during her fight. Competitors don't get mic'd. Izuku would have remembered hearing them if they had been. In fact, there had been matches in the past where obsessive viewers had resorted to lip reading to determine exactly what type of trash talk or emotional outburst was taking place. Less focused efforts were usually made on an increasingly formal tradition called the F count. The F count was pretty much what it sounded like. Sports festival fans would guess before the event began how many times a given competitor would swear during the course of the festival using only the information available before the first event began. Then there was a crowdsourced effort to go through the fight footage and figure out who had guessed closest to the actual F count. There was no prize, but many argued that the prestige was its own reward. Izuku was surprised that Mai was willing to do something as outlandish and risky as borrowing the stadium sound system. He was seriously concerned that he wouldn't be able to pull it off. When he recalled Mai's minor breakdown and the candid sharing of her festival dream in the cafeteria, he decided that he could at least do a feasibility study on this particular aspect of her dream. As much as he cringed at the idea of interfering with the festival in any way, the thought of disappointing Mai was somehow even worse. Soon enough they arrived at the station where the rumbling of Mai's stomach turned their thoughts to dinner. Izuku told Mai of a takeout place that he thought she would like near the apartment as they boarded the train. This led to Mai leaning against him as soon as they sat down so that she could peer at the menu on his phone. He found that the fresh, clean scent he recalled from yesterday morning was completely gone. Now Mai smelled damp, earthy, and sweaty, with only the faintest undertone of what he might call essential Mai, something he had eventually characterized as mildly sweet like machine oil and sharp like iron filings. He would definitely make a point to offer her the shower tonight. Still, he enjoyed the feeling of Mai pressed into his side. It didn't even make him terribly anxious the way it might have a few days ago. After he placed the order, she rested her head on his shoulder. This inspired a more familiar level of panic, though he eventually leaned into the touch slightly himself, resting his cheek against the top of her head. His brow furrowed at the sensation of Mai's hair against his face. It wasn't just damp, there was something else that made it cling in a way that he hadn't expected. Carefully so as not to disturb Mai, he brought a finger from his other side to swipe at his face. It came away with a faint tint of brown. "I think the dirt in your hair turned to mud in the downpour," he chuckled quietly, though it sounded closer to wheezing than anything. He felt Mai's body shudder as she giggled to herself. Yeah, it's pretty gross. The giggles intensified a moment later and Izuku pulled away from her slightly to get a look at her face. Mai noticed the movement and met his eyes, which caused the giggles to redouble. It's like I make my own gravy, she sputtered, barely holding herself together well enough to speak. That's disturbing. Izuku attempted to say, though he was laughing hard enough that it took him a couple of tries. After another moment of giddy, self-perpetuating laughter, they finally managed to pull themselves together. Mai naturally resumed her previous position on Izuku's shoulder as her giggles petered out. You want a shower after dinner, he suggested. Definitely, she agreed quietly. Izuku heard both a smile and fatigue in her voice. The moment of mirth overrode his nerves about Mai's proximity and even managed to distract him from his anxiety over the microphone situation. For the rest of the ride he simply allowed her to draw on his warmth and resigned himself to having one muddy cheek. Apparently he actually drifted off for a moment, as did Mai. Both jolted awake when their stop was called, scrambling to disembark before the doors closed. The Midoriya shower was transformative and Mai looked forward to using it again. The experience was like being inside a warm cloud that smelled like Izuku. The water around her feet ran a sickly brown as the mud was forced from her hair, but she still couldn't help smiling as she remembered making Izuku laugh on the train. She was invigorated by the cleansing waters even as her feet begged for her to get off of them. When the water ran clear and the pain in her feet outweighed the magic of the shower, she finally stepped out. This time she found the painkillers without Izuku's help, washing them down with a handful of water from the sink. After drying herself off and changing into sweatpants and a tank top, she returned to the living room and headed straight for the couch to the immediate relief of her lower half. After she sat down, she closed her eyes for a moment to revel in the experience of being clean and comfortable. The smell of dinner still clung to the air in the living area. It had been both excellent and plentiful. Izuku had said that it normally made 2 meals for him, but tonight they'd both been ravenous enough to eat theirs in one sitting. She would go find Izuku in a minute. As Mai teetered on the edge of consciousness, she reflected that she'd even eaten a vegetable tonight. She mentally crossed it off of her to-do list. There was a desk lamp on the floor at the end of the couch, bathing the room in a soft, warm glow. Mai blearily observed that it was a good level of light for her, enough to navigate by but not so much that it would have disturbed her rest. She was pretty sure it hadn't been there when she closed her eyes. Izuku's absence was evident, both physically and as a feeling. She felt as though something was not lining up with her expectations and quickly identified it. There had been talk of spooning again, and she was currently slouched on the little sofa by herself, not spooning a DMN thing. She recalled her earlier intent to find Izuku, but it was apparent that she'd fallen asleep instead. She sought her phone in the dim glow, eventually finding it on the coffee table. 12. It was officially Sunday, but Izuku might still be awake. She softly padded in the direction of the bedrooms and hoped that there would be a clue as to which one held her quarry. Even if the door hadn't been open, the Izuku door sign in All Might's signature colors would have been a giveaway. She peered in at him and saw him hunched over his computer, silhouetted by the glow of the screen. It looked like he was shopping. Her quirk allowed her to recognize the logo of an electronics retailer, but his head, mostly his hair, really obscured the items on the page. Even though she hadn't found him poring over code, there was still something inspiring or reassuring about his bearing. The tableau of him at the computer filled her with confidence. She couldn't imagine anyone besides Izuku being in her corner right now. Hey! She rubbed her eyes and yawned widely. What are you working on? He jumped slightly when she spoke but smiled as soon as he turned to face her. Oh, just researching microphones while this is compiling. She rolled her tired eyes at him fondly. Well, don't lose sleep over that. I'm sure whatever they normally use will be fine. She waved the issue off with surprising indifference. Izuku silently reflected that there was merit in figuring out exactly what model the stadium used. Using the same model would let him sidestep any question of compatibility. On the other hand, he needed to understand what was actually available to him. He couldn't just assume that there would be spare mics in the stadium, and even if he did find an unattended MIC during the event, he couldn't guarantee that it wouldn't be missed. Whatever Mai ended up using, it was likely going to be something that Izuku brought into the stadium from outside. He couldn't dwell on the microphone issue because Mai was speaking again. So, you? Mai began slowly. Consented to further spooning. She seemed to be making a concerted effort to be nonchalant as she spoke, but Izuku still detected some amusing undertones of accusation and hope. I did. He agreed with a warm smile and a hint of polite amusement. Mai reached out to him and made a subdued version of the grabby hands gesture from the previous night, her eyes flicking in the direction of the bed as she did so. Izuku's smile widened and he stood up from his computer. He stretched, and Mai found something to appreciate in the ferocity of his yawn and the strp of skin that was exposed above his waistband when his shirt lifted. He looked sleek but soft and she really couldn't get her arms around him soon enough. Izuku's bed was not large and he only had one pillow, but neither of them had any illusions about that being a problem. They wanted the contact. It was exactly what they'd been waiting for. As they settled under the covers and Mai looped an arm around him, Izuku was confused and a little disappointed to discover that she now smelled almost exactly like him. However, after a moment of reflection he decided that it had its charms. Mai only smelled like him because she'd become part of his life to such a degree that she'd just used his shower. That was something. The familiarity of the gesture pleasantly overshadowed the familiarity of the scent. Meanwhile, Mai was delighted to discover that the smell of Izuku on the sheets was all-encompassing. Her own hair already smelled like his shampoo, but the scent in the bed was more complex. She inhaled it in great, lazy lungfuls as she pulled him closer. Her head buzzed with comfort, fatigue, and nebulous but bright emotion. Today was fun. Mai said quietly. Yeah. Izuku agreed. I was worried over nothing, in the end. Mai added sleepily. What were you worried about? Izuku whispered. The landslide zone. My mom, she died because of something like a landslide. I knew you were right about terrain in the obstacle course though, so I went. But it wasn't that bad. Izuku went completely still. For a moment he didn't even breathe. He had no idea that she'd been afraid. If someone had asked him before now he probably would have said that Mai wasn't afraid of anything. I wonder if she'd be proud of me. Mai mused. I think she'd be proud of you whether you went or not. Izuku whispered fervently. You're amazing. Thanks. Mai murmured, squeezing Izuku a bit closer. She's the reason I want to make heroes faster. If they'd been faster, maybe they could have helped. I don't blame them. She clarified quietly. I want to help, though. I want to save someone's mom if I can. Mai spoke so lightly, as if she wasn't talking about life and death, or even loss, and Izuku could only marvel at her stoicism while tears streaked across his face and soaked into his pillow. I have some vague ideas about motorcycles but I'm too tired to think. She murmured, then nuzzled further into Izuku's hair, brushing her nose against his neck in the process. Good night. She whispered. Good night. Izuku whispered absently. His mind churned, ruminating on Mai's casual revelation until the warmth of her body and the whisper of her breath against his skin lulled him to sleep.